Hello Internet and welcome to, actually it's a bit more mundane than that. It's just Minecraft Dungeons and it's not a theory, it's just another guide. With the advent of the Echoing Void DLC, they've made a lot of changes with enchantments and things that affected the meta quite a bit, and the three guides that I'd already made were kind of obsolete because of that, because they included enchants that you no longer would want to run for the best that your weapon could be. And I knew that I'd eventually have to make addendums to those enchantment videos. And I could just as easily have just made one video for every weapon type like I was going to, but I figured instead of doing that, wouldn't it be more helpful if I just made one more all-encompassing guide that covered more than just one specific weapon? Well, turns out that I already did. I am a big member of the Minecraft Dungeons Discord server, and a lot of you that watch this probably already are members of that server and know me from there first. But I'm really active there, and I'm always constantly sharing knowledge with how enchantments work, but also damage calculations and things like that. And I put together this guide to have it pinned just for people to use as reference for things, not just for what they would want to use on their weapons, but it just lists and describes things so that they can more accurately just pick for themselves with their own reasoning and their own decisions if they think that something else might work better for them. So, since I already posted this in image format, I figured why not I also just make a video of me, well, basically essentially just kind of reading off from this chart that I'd made. But I feel like that might make things a little bit easier and just better for access, and I will include, at least in the description below, I'll have timestamps for different categories, like the different enchant categories or the different weapons, things like that. But this covers not only that, but it covers, like you can see, artifacts, armor enchantments, the armors themselves, and it does include a lot of, not the only enchantment combos you can use on stuff, but say what I would call the best of the best. Anyway, let me just get into this before this turns out to be 2 hours long, and I'm just going to read through this, and not just like a robot though, I will be adding some of my own 2 cents in, some things that present/future me would have added to this, and I can edit this if I want to, but for the most part it's pretty set, just maybe add a little flavor text. So anyway, the way that this guide starts is, I say, in this guide I'm going to be breaking down all of the enchants one by one. Well, not every enchant off the bat, just the more useful ones, as well as listing which weapons they work best on, excluding weapons that have the enchantment built in, because you cannot select that enchant on the weapon itself if it's already built in, followed by a list of enchantment combos for every single weapon. First off, all weapon enchantment can be broken into one of 4 categories, at least 4 that I could think of, without getting too specific for the sake of it, that being healing, damage, defense, and utility. And my rule of thumb is, with some exceptions, the best setup is a balance of 1 healing enchant, 2 damage enchants, and 1 defense or sometimes utility enchant. So let me break them down by these categories. Number 1 I would go with is healing. Look for that first and foremost. There are 3 enchantments in this category, and which one is best to use depends on both the weapon that you're using and also the type of build that you're using too. They are leeching. The first and foremost one, because that is probably the most common enchantment, mainly because it is actually a common enchant, so you will actually find it on default difficulty, and it works with the most weapons. This enchantment heals you by 9% of a mob's max health whenever you kill that mob, which is a lot when you consider that most of the tougher mobs can have 10 to 14 million health or more, especially if enchanted, they can have way more health. And at 251 power, players have just over 2 million health themselves. It's like 1,971,047 health, something like that. So 9% of that is huge, like of 10 to 14 million. However, if a mob does die from, say, swirling, thundering, burning, etc. damage instead of your weapon, leeching will not trigger, so it doesn't pair as well with indirect damage enchantments. They can all block you from getting healed from leeching. And because it goes by how fast you kill an enemy, the more damage per second that you have, the faster enemies die, meaning you get pseudo more healing per second from leeching. So it's best that if you pair leeching with 2 or 3 melee weapon damage enchants for the maximum healing potential, because you kill enemies faster. Weapons that have it built in are Heart Stealer and beginning and the end, and these work really well because it frees up a slot for an extra damage enchant, so you can kill enemies quicker and technically get more healing, even though mobs do have limited health per level, so it's only somewhat extra healing. It's just faster healing, but not more total, I guess, if I were to try to explain it. And weapons that it works best on is pretty much almost every weapon. You've got the sword line, you've got the axe line, the pickaxe line, double axes, cutlass weapons, claymores, hammers, moon daggers, because they actually have a lot of DPS. You've got gauntlets, even fighters' bindings, because it has high DPS. Sickles use it well, katana, glaives, spears, battle staffs, soul scythes, soul knives, maces, whips, tempest knives, bone clubs, saw blades, anchors, and all of the new end DLC weapons like the obsidian claymore, the backstabber, and the void touch blade lines. Now for almost like an opposite type of healing enchantment, we've got Radiance. Whenever your weapon hits an enemy, you have a 20% chance for this to trigger and heal you and all allies around you by a certain amount, which at 251 power is 230,058 health. Since this is a percentage chance to trigger every hit, the faster that a weapon hits, the better that it is. However, even some fast weapons have such high damage per second that leeching is better for them, and likewise some high DPS weapons are so fast that Radiance is more useful on those. However, the unique benefit that Radiance has over leeching is that it can't be blocked by enchantments like Swirling, Fire Aspect, Thundering, etc. because they trigger on hit and not on kill. And also, your damage per second doesn't matter, so you can run Radiance on either a fast weapon that's built for defense or utility instead of damage, so you can get the most healing out of it, or if you're using a fast weapon that's using non-direct damage enchants, again, like Swirling, Shockwave, Thundering, etc. Plus, it's, again, nice for multiplayer, because it heals nearby allies, and also if you have summons, because everyone around you gets healed. Weapons that have this built in are, well, just Sun's Grace, and while it is a slow weapon, extra healing is pretty nice. I consider it better than the Flail for that. And then weapons that it works best on, as you can see here, are just all of the fast weapons. These are the ones that, at Apocalypse plus 25, which has a 30% healing amount nerf that the devs don't tell you about because they're really shady and scummy, these weapons are able to use Radiance alone more comfortably. So you got all the daggers, all the gauntlets, all the sickles, all the rapiers, all of the saw blades. If you hear that, sorry, there's a storm going on. Hopefully my power doesn't get cut out. And also the coral blades, the backstabbers, and the void touch blades. As a side note, as you may have noticed, some weapons do appear listed for both enchants, and that's because those weapons both hit very fast for Radiance and have high DPS for leeching, some needing damage investment though to hit that DPS. Weapons that unquestionably use Radiance better though would be the dagger line minus moon daggers and fighters' bindings, and then weapons that unquestionably use leeching better would be the backstabber line and void touch blades, because even though they're fast, their DPS is so high that it doesn't matter. Now, there are weapons that can use both depending on the enchantments, and that would be moon daggers, the gauntlet weapons, the sickle weapons, and the saw blades, depending on how you have them built. However, because of the gilded meta, and mainly because I accidentally figured this out when my first bee stinger that I got from Solemn Giant was gilded with, I believe it was gilded with leeching, but also had Radiance. Trying both of them out on fast enough weapons is insane. Like, you can use both Radiance and leeching on a weapon if it's sufficiently fast, which both covers you against tougher enemies that take a little while to die, which means you're not going to be getting leeching healing while you're fighting them because they're taking a while to kill. So Radiance is keeping you healed as you're fighting them. It's also good for healing with every kill in case, say, an enemy gets a cheeky hit right before they die and Radiance isn't able to heal that off. You got leeching to top you off. My bee stinger that I used in a previous Ancient Hunt video was Critical Hit, Gravity, Radiance, and Leeching, and it is so comfy that I've used it also on Tier 3 daily trials because it's just that defensively good and just insane at healing. And yeah, the weapons that use both well are any weapon that's in this list here for Radiance, as well as, say, you got swords, you got Tempest Knives, the Cutlass weapons can use both as well. Also battle staffs, mainly though the normal battle staff because it's a bit faster, but any of these can use both healing options really good. Finally, you have Anima Conduit for your last healing enchant option. And this enchantment appears on soul weapons, and only on soul weapons. On top of giving +1 to your soul gathering, every soul that you collect heals you by 6% of your max HP. Though if you have less than 6% of your max health missing, like say if you have 100 health and you're missing just 6 health, Anima Conduit should heal you fully, but it doesn't. It heals you less and less until it only heals 1 HP per soul orb. Still though, very useful for a soul build, though it's only mainly useful on your melee weapon if it's a soul build, or if you're running a ranged artifact build that's not getting kills with your melee weapon and it wants extra healing. Like say, if you're using a satchel build, or if you're using a harp crossbow with triple fireworks arrows, you might want any soul weapon that has Anima Conduit so you get healing for killing all the mobs with those weapons, because you're not really going to be fighting them with your weapon to get leeching or radiance healing. Though, if you're running a melee build, like I said, you would want leeching or radiance, but if you have passive healing on a melee build, Anima Conduit is really useful to have on a soul ranged weapon, especially since you collect souls from any enemy that's killed, even if it's by a multiplayer friend. If using a soul build, you don't collect souls, however, from kills that you get with your soul artifacts. Aside from, like, say your soul summon kills, so the soul lantern kills, they will give you souls back. Otherwise though, if you're running Anima Conduit on your weapons, you need to kill with your melee or ranged weapon to actually get Anima Conduit to trigger, because otherwise you're not going to collect souls. And yeah, the only weapons that get this are also the weapons that use it best, which are all these soul sides and soul knife weapons. With healing out of the way though, we have next damage, and I generally have this in order from the least effective to the most effective damage enchantments, but I kind of have this first one misplaced a bit. Pain Cycle should be first, if I'm honest. But yeah, damage is the bread and butter of most weapons, of course. Because the quicker that you kill enemies, not only do you get faster leeching and Anima Conduit healing, but also the less time those enemies are a problem for you, you know, doing damage to you. There are many damage enchants, but for the most part, they're pretty straightforward. And the reason why I have a lot of them listed is assuming that you can't get a hold of the best ones, so I have them listed and explained generally in order of how good they are, but just so you can get an idea of what you might want to use yourself. As a pseudo first one though, I might have said Smiting, because it's like Illager's Bane, just a bit worse, but Smiting wasn't really worth putting on here unless you really had nothing better. But for Illager's Bane, simply put, this enchantment multiplies all damage dealt to any Illager type enemy by 40%, or you just multiply it by 1.4 times. And that means whatever your total damage is, well, physical, 40% of that gets added on when you're hitting Illagers. And I said, not the most useful enchantment, but since Illagers are more dangerous than undead, and they're present in raid parties, especially the raid captains, and especially ones that have Isologers or the Geomancers, and a lot of them can be blocking the main pathway in levels, having this is actually really useful if you don't have better options. And yeah, this weapon, or this enchant is built in on the Bone Cudgel weapon, but it works best on any weapon if that's your best option. This one here though, Pain Cycle, I should have put it before Illager's Bane because it is a bit worse. You'll see why. How it works though is when you land hits with this enchant on your melee weapon, it builds up a pain stack at the cost of losing 3% of your max HP every hit that you land. When you have 5 stacks of pain built up, your next hit does quintuple damage, quote unquote, meaning that you're, if this is triggering on your 6th hit, so you're landing 5 hits of normal damage, and then the 6th hit does 5 hits of damage, so you're basically doing 10 hits worth of damage every 6 attacks, which, if you use a calculator, is 66.67% more increased damage on average. Though, since it triggers every 6th hit, if you have weapons that have a 2 or 3 hit combo where the final hit is much stronger, you can actually get more extra damage out of it if you keep triggering Pain Cycle on that last hit. For instance, maces do a lot more damage on their final hit, and they are 3-hit combos, so if you can consistently trigger Pain Cycle on that 3rd hit, it's 103% more damage. However, this is 66.67% or 103% at best, because unlike Illager's Bane, it does not multiply your total damage by 5 like it says it does. Again, the devs are not very forthcoming or transparent with the info they give. It only increases the base damage of your weapon by 400%. So if you're hitting for 100 damage normally, you would hit for 500 damage when you trigger it. However, if you trigger a strength potion, for instance, that will give you 200 damage per hit. If you trigger then Pain Cycle, you would assume that you would get 1000 damage because you're like, oh, 5 times 200. But what's actually happening is that Strength Potion is adding a flat 100% damage increase to your base weapon's damage, and Pain Cycle is adding a 400 flat % increase as well. So they total for 500% more damage, meaning that you're only actually getting 600 damage when you trigger Pain Cycle with a Strength Potion, because you're getting 5 times the original 100% from Pain Cycle plus the 100 extra damage from Strength Potion instead of 1000, so it's a little over half, so that's actually already quite a bit worse. It's almost half as effective right there. Like I said, again, because they're not multiplying each other, just the base damage. So it's not going to come out to 66.67% damage or 103% more damage most of the time. Also, because Pain Cycle hurts you with every attack, not only do you want to use it on a slower weapon that does more damage per hit so you don't have to land as many hits on the enemy so you don't hurt yourself as much, it means that it also doesn't work with Cowardice because Cowardice requires full health and Pain Cycle keeps you away from having full health most of the time. Anyway, weapons that it works best on would basically be anything that's not dagger speed or faster. Otherwise, yeah, you're going to be taking too much damage because you could try running Radiance on your weapon to counter Pain Cycle, but I've done that with Fighter's Bindings and I've tested it, and with the 30% healing nerf on Apocalypse plus 25, it doesn't reliably counter Pain Cycle. Like, if you test it on the dummy and just punch it, eventually your health is going to drop down to 1 and it barely climbs up more. I just would not run it in general, but if you're going to, try it on slower weapons that use leeching. And if you want lifesteal too, why not? Next is an enchantment, though, that I believe is better than Pain Cycle, just by a lot. It's as simple as Illager's Bane. Sharpness increases your weapon's damage by 33%, and it applies to all mobs that you attack. However, this enchant is not a full multiplier. It's kind of a pseudo-multiplier, because it does multiply with other multipliers, but those damage multipliers multiply everything, so it's not a really unique trait for Sharpness to multiply with Illager's Bane. But Sharpness does multiply with itself. Oh, sorry, also if you can hear that in the background, that is the new Chihuahua that we had gotten. He has separation issues, and right now, the person he's attached to the most is outside on the porch for a bit, and he can't handle it. Anyway, like I was saying, on paper, flatly, 33% damage if you stack it twice would be 66% damage. But since Sharpness multiplies itself, if you have 2 of them, it actually gives you 76.89% more damage because it's also multiplying that first 33%. If you have 3 of them, it comes out to about 135% more damage and change, where normally if it's flat, it would have been 99% more. So it's not too bad. Otherwise, though, yeah, Sharpness does only multiply the base weapon's damage. So if you combine it with armor that has 20% weapon damage boost aura, they only give you 53% more damage total. Though it does allow you to use Cowardice at least, which is 73% more damage, which is better than this 66.67%. That hurts you too. But yeah, for example, if you're doing 100 damage and you have a Strength Potion making your damage 200, Sharpness will not add 66 to it, which would be 33% of 200. It only adds 33 damage, which is 33% of the original 100. Weapons that have this built in would be Diamond Sword, Bronze Sword, and its seasonal reskin Frost Slayer, but it works best on every weapon. Also, speaking of Pain Cycle, luckily it's not built into anything, because what it would do is it would triple your damage at level 1, which would basically make it a worse critical hit that also hurts you. If any weapon had Pain Cycle built in, I would not use it. I would not even bother having it in my inventory. Anyway, moving on, this is one of the more it's the first nuanced damage enchant that doesn't work as directly as, say, Sharpness or Illager's Bane. This is Thundering. This is the first indirect damage enchantment on this list. Instead of increasing your weapon's damage, it adds another separate type of damage to your weapon. How it works is every hit that you land has a 30% chance to call down a lightning bolt that strikes the enemy for little over 287.5 thousand damage, and it hits multiple nearby enemies too. So on average, meaning if you take 30% of the damage and apply it to every hit that you land is doing 86,269 extra damage of thundering. How useful this is depends on both your weapon's speed, for how often thundering triggers, as well as how much your weapon's damage does per hit, because that dictates how much percentage that thundering is adding to it. And for this, the best weapons that you could use it with are these 6 here. On a Coral Blade and Sponge Striker with their speed and their initial damage, you get 40.2% more DPS, or 70.3 if you have Lightning Focus on as well. With Fighter's Bindings, it is 45% more DPS, or almost 80% more with Lightning Focus. On it's actually different for a Freezing Foil and the Rapier and Bee Stinger, because the Freezing Foil is a bit slower normally, but if you have max attack speed, like Renegade or Spider Armor with a Mushroom, they have the same hit rate. It's just that Freezing Foil is a bit stronger with its hits, so Thundering's not going to add as much total. Like I said, the more damage your weapon does normally, the less percentage that Thundering adds to it. So for a Freezing Foil, it's 64.3%, and on the other two, it's 65.9% more. And with Lightning Focus, they both do a whopping 112.5% more and 115.3% more, so it's more than double, which is crazy. Also, though, keep in mind that this is a flat damage increase, and it is not multiplied by most other effects. Though, since it is indirect damage, any thundering damage that you land on an enemy will not be returned to you in Thorns damage. However, though, if you're hitting any kind of physical damage on that enemy, like if you're hitting an enemy and Thundering is hitting the enemy, but it's also striking nearby Thorns mobs, you will not take any damage. But if your weapon itself is hitting a Thorns mob, the physical damage is still going to be returned to you by, I think it was 12.5%, which I think is still way too much considering how much damage that we can actually deal now. Also though, since Thundering can block leeching from triggering if it gets the kill instead of the weapon, it is best on weapons that can reliably use Radiance. You can use Lifesteal Armor, but any indirect damage from your weapon will not give you Lifesteal Healing. It has to be the weapon's damage itself, be it ranged or melee, or it can be certain artifact damage, like Soul Artifacts definitely give you Lifesteal Healing, maybe Sensual Elements, but for the most part, yeah, indirect damage enchants on your weapon or armor do not heal you with Lifesteal. So you don't want to load up your weapon with indirect damage and then expect to get good healing with Lifesteal, because that's only going to be basically 6% leeching on the weapon's base damage, which is not always reliable in itself. Anyway, weapons that have this built in are Stormlander, to make it a reference to Thor's Hammer Mjolnir. Not very useful though, because it's a slow weapon and it's level 1 Thundering. But the weapons that it works best on are these 6 weapons that I already mentioned here, because they're so fast and they have little damage per hit. The next enchant is sort of a direct enchant in terms of its damage, but it's indirect in how it works. It's a bit more nuanced. How this works is it deals 45% more damage to enemies that are not actively targeting you. This includes not only enemies that aren't suspecting you while you're in shadow form, or enemies that are targeting other players or mobs, like if you're in multiplayer, or if you have pets, or if you've affected them with Wild Rage and they're hitting other mobs. It also will affect mobs that are blinded by ink, or that are affected by the stun status. This makes it fairly useful when playing online with others, or when using Squid Armor or Glow Squid Armor for the ink, or when you're using armor that has Snowball in it for the stun lock, or when you're using fast weapons with stunning. This damage is also a full 45% multiplier as well, making it more solid than Committed on some weapons, because Committed has a range with how it works, with its best being 45% more damage, but Ambush on the weapons that it works best on is a full 45% damage increase. So you're getting the full effect that Committed would get on some weapons. But yeah, these builds that use Ambush all include Gravity and Stunning, because it's just amazing with it. Weapons that have this built in are Backstabber and Swift Striker, meaning that they are locked at 15% more damage on it, but it's still not bad because they can run Stunning and Gravity really well. But the weapons, aside from that it works best on, would be all of the daggers, all of the sickles, all of the gauntlets except for Fighter's Bindings, a Battle Staff because it is slightly faster than a Growing Staff and Battle Staff of Terror for using Stunning, and also on the Void Touch Blades and Beginning and the End. The reason why you don't want to use it really on rapiers or like any of these weapons up here that use thundering is because you get more damage from things like thundering or swirling or shockwave than you do from ambush, so it's more useful to use those instead of ambush. Except for rapiers, but they make really good use of exploding, which I'll mention a little bit later. Because rapiers especially have low DPS, ambush doesn't help it as much as exploding would. Or even just thundering. Thundering is so much extra damage, you want to use that or exploding with stunning anyway. But for these weapons here that would otherwise use committed with stunning, ambush, so good. Next we move on to more the realm of meta enchantments, but with the advent, like I said, of the newer enchantments, critical hit has fallen out of grace a little bit, but it's still a solid option. How it works is, it's a chance-based enchantment that gives you a 20% chance every hit to land a hit that does 3 times damage. This means, if you average it out, that every hit that you're landing is doing 3 hits worth of damage, or basically every 5 hits you're doing 7 hits worth of damage, which means 2 extra free hits out of 5 hits, that's 40% more damage. And unlike what some YouTubers will say, this is 40% more DPS no matter what the weapon is. Fast or slow, weak or strong, it is still 40% more damage. Even though if you're using, say, Fighter's Bindings, you are critting more often, but the Fighter's Bindings hit so weak for every individual hit that those crits are not worth as much. Whereas an Anchor, which is the slowest weapon in the game, even though it's not going to crit as much, those crits are worth triple of 2,147,149 damage. That's a lot more than triple of 191,710 damage. Like, a lot more. And just like Illager's Bane, this is a complete multiplier, meaning that your total physical damage per second is increased by 40% with this, against every mob. But again, it doesn't apply to indirect damage, so like things like swirling, etc. do not get multiplied by this, so they both work separately. Weapons that have this built in are Hawkbrand and its Halloween reskin Sinister Sword, as well as Master's Katana. And it works best on every weapon. There is no weapon that cannot use this enchantment. Although if it's a really hard-hitting weapon, there is a case where you wouldn't want to one-shot yourself on a Thorns mob if it triggers, but, you know, risk-reward, you know, you gain and you lose with it. Next is Enigma Resonator. This enchantment's almost identical to Critical Hit in every way, except that it only appears on soul weapons. On top of giving +1 soul gathering, it differs in that it doesn't have a 20% chance to trigger. Instead, it has a rising chance that increases the more full that your soul meter is, and it caps at a 25% chance. This means that at max, you get 50% more DPS with a full soul meter. If you have both Crit and Enigma Resonator on the same weapon and they both trigger at the same time, it does also come out to a 9 times damage hit. However, for short levels where you're not going to gather that many souls, Critical Hit would be better since you have a constant 40% damage per second increase, whereas Enigma Resonator starts out really low and it climbs as you get more souls. Though, unlike Anima Conduit, which is only good on soul builds, still, Enigma Resonator is solid for both a soul weapon or, well, on a soul weapon, whether it's for a soul build or a melee build, I should rather say. Weapons that have it built in are only Soul Fists and Moondaggers, and it's interesting, these weapons are not soul weapons, they are just soul uniques of normal weapons. The reason why they are made soul weapons, or that they have the soul gathering, is because they have Enigma Resonator built in. The other true soul weapons inherently have +1 soul gathering. That's why these only have 1, and Eternal Knife, which has a soul enchant built in, has 2. Still though, even at level 1, it is 30% more damage per second with a full soul meter, so on those 2 weapons, it's so good. But yeah, just like Anima Conduit, the only weapons that get it are also the ones that use it best, which are the Soul Scythes and the Soul Knives. Next here, we're getting into more the realm of meta, as in, like, even with this current meta, there is a precedent for running Committed instead of other enchantments. And the way Committed works is, just like Critical Hit, Enigma Resonator, and Illager's Bane, it is a full weapon damage multiplier, but the way that it applies its damage is different from all the rest. And its average DPS isn't really constant. So how it works is, however much percentage of a mob's health is missing, that's how much extra percentage damage that your next hit will do. So for example, if a mob has 100 health and you do 10 damage, they're missing 10% of their health, meaning that your next hit's going to do 10% more, so your hit does 11% on the next hit, which means then that they're missing 21% of their health total, so your next hit does 21% more, etc, etc. So it's a climbing damage multiplier. How much damage per second that this adds depends on how much percentage of a mob's health that your first hit takes out against them. On average, it does come out to like a bit over 40%, but there are quite a few percentages, like if you start out with say 25% or so, where your total damage increase comes out to 27% to 39% more. So sometimes it's worse than critical hit and others it's better. But since its damage boost only depends on how much percentage of a mob's health is missing, it means that any damage that a mob takes helps it. So committed pairs better with things like swirling, thundering, shockwave, etc. than other damage enchants, because the damage from swirling and shockwave and stuff is increasing how much percent health enemies are missing, so it helps committed out. Which is also really nice if you are peppering enemies with, say, artifacts or with range damage, because that will give your committed damage inherently higher. Like say if a mob's already missing half their health, that right there is already a 50% damage boost. So it's variable, but overall committed is very solid and worth using even in this current meta. Weapons that have this built in are Growing Staff, Truth Seeker, and Resolute Tempest Knife, and at level 1 that means you're getting about half as much of a damage per second increase. It's still, though, very good for a passive enchant, and this works best on every weapon. There is not a single weapon that does not use this enchant well. Just some enchants the weapons might use a little better. Now, these next two enchants here I don't necessarily think are better than the enchants above. It just depends. On some weapons, yes, they work amazingly better than the enchants above, but that is on a select few weapons. The others it doesn't work as well for. Yeah, these enchants are useful for what they do. The first one being Shockwave. How it works is, at the end of your weapon's combo, a shockwave is released in the direction that you're facing and travels a fair distance, piercing all mobs and pushing them back slightly. This can be used to hold off advancing mobs for a long time while landing a lot of free damage on them before they even get close enough to attack, which can even actually let you kill those mobs before they get close enough to hit you too. But it also works for cheesing enchanted creepers to explode just out of reach of hitting you, if your weapon triggers Shockwave fast enough. This is because a creeper's countdown will start when they're out of range of hitting you, and it will continue to count down even if they stay at that distance away from you, so they will explode out of reach. So if you're using Fighter's Bindings with Shockwave, the pushback from it will keep them pushed back long enough that they explode before they get close enough within their countdown to hit you. Unless they say maybe have Quick, or Rush, or Gravity Pulse, or Chilling, or actually Protection doesn't matter, but Chilling to slow down your attack speed so that you're not hitting them as fast to push them back as much, that can affect it a little bit. Otherwise though, yeah, it's really solid for cheesing a lot of things. And it can hit through Geomancer Pillars. As far as I know, they might have changed that in the update, but you have in the past been able to hit them through it, so very nice for blocks like that as well. Other things though, yeah, Shockwave will not hit through solid objects. Anyway, on its own, Shockwave at 251 power does 460,103 damage, and pretty much like Thundering, how useful that this enchant is depends on both how little time your weapon takes to finish its combo, because that determines how quick Shockwave triggers, but also how much damage your weapon's combo does. So for Fighter's Bindings and all the Cutlass weapons, Shockwave is 60% more damage per second, and on Coral Blade and Sponge Striker it is 71.4% more DPS. So really good. Though people will talk about one-hit weapons, because that triggers Shockwave and Swirling in one hit, which is not bad. I just don't think it's the most ideal. I'll tell you why in this paragraph here. Other one-hit combo weapons can make somewhat decent use of this, but those weapons prefer leeching for healing, which can be blocked by Shockwave. And since Shockwave is indirect damage, Lifesteal will not trigger from that damage, so you won't get full healing based on your damage. On top of that, Shockwave provides flat damage which cannot be multiplied by most other effects or buffs, so it's lost a lot of luster with the rise of new damage enchants. Though, the perk of it is, just like with Thundering, the damage from Shockwave does not get returned to you from Thorns. But yeah, it's most effective when used with weapons that can solidly use Radiance. Weapons that have it built in are Whirlwind, which it's only level 1, so even though it's a weapon that uses leeching, it doesn't interfere too much, but since mine has leeching and refreshment, I often like to actively face away from enemies that I'm attacking just so I don't hit them with the shockwave. Because I have had it block crucial leeching healing that I needed, which got me killed. So yeah, not a fan. I prefer Curse Axe a lot more. It also just looks cooler too. But shockwave just looks, I don't know, it looks weird coming from that weapon. But yeah, weapons that it works best on, like I mentioned, are Fighter's Bindings and the Coral Blade line. Next is Swirling. Just like Shockwave, this enchantment triggers at the end of a weapon's combo. However, for it to activate, the final hit of your combo needs to actually hit the enemy. And instead of being a long-range attack, it strikes mobs in a 360-degree area around you. And what it lacks in range, it makes up for in damage. It deals 613,471 damage per trigger at 251 power. Aside from that, it's basically like Shockwave in every way. It ignores mobs' thorns damage, it blocks leeching while not giving you lifesteal healing, works best with radiance weapons, and its usefulness depends on how quick you can execute your combo and how much damage your weapon's combo does normally. Just like with the weapons I mentioned above, on Fighter's Bindings and the Cutlass line, it is 80% more DPS, and on the Coral Blade line, it's 95.2% more DPS. You could basically calculate this by just looking at Swirling and knowing that Shockwave does 75% or 3/4 as much damage as it. Weapons that have it built in are the Sheer Daggers, and since Sheer Daggers can use Radiance, it doesn't really interfere with it. And the weapons that it works best on are, again, Fighter's Bindings and the Coral Blade line. You might have noticed that I did also mention Cutlass for the damage increase. My little side note here is that while those two enchants add the same percentage more damage to Cutlass weapons as they do to Fighter's Bindings, the fact that Cutlass weapons are less than reliable for using Radiance alone makes it less appealing to use Shockwave and Swirling on them. Unless you either pair them along with Lifesteal armor on top of Radiance, or if you're using Stunning as well, because yeah, Radiance on a Cutlass weapon alone for healing will not out-heal the damage you're taking from enemies in a melee confrontation, but Stunning, since it has a decent chance of holding off enemies from attacking, can give you the freedom to heal off that damage with Radiance. So, you might have seen me actually run this in my Obsidian Pinnacle run with my Dancer's Sword, where I was able to do it without potioning, but it was not very comfy. I needed Stunning though to hold off the enemies, otherwise I would have taken too much damage, and since Stunning does not work on things like Raid Captains, you gotta be more careful against them. Anyway, these last two enchantments here are the top meta enchants for most weapons. Like, these are the creme de la creme of weapon damage enchants, the first one being Enchanting. This once ranged only enchantment has become one of the top meta damage enchants to use for melee, at least according to me. Why is because it applies a full 2x damage melee multiplier to all enchanted enemies, and considering that enchanted enemies are the biggest threat in the game, and why we want damage enchants on our weapons to begin with, this makes it the most important damage enchant overall. However, if you want to get the best returns out of it, it is best to first at least have a damage enchant that applies to all enemies before enchanting, since you'll get overall more out of that, because you're going to be doing extra damage to normal enemies and enchanted enemies alike, and also because there are some pretty beefy unenchanted enemies like Armored Vindicators, Ravagers, Squall Golems, mini-bosses, things like that. After that though, after you have your overall damage enchant, you'll want enchanting for enchanted mobs, since going for more damage against non-enchanted enemies is just unnecessary overkill. Like, you're not helping yourself as much there because those mobs aren't as much of a threat, and you've already got them covered. Also though, as I found out from someone was showing me a video where they were showing off the power of Committed along with Void Strike, and they were going against Heart of Ender, but I noticed that Enchanting was triggering too, which led me to test it out on Heart of Ender and make that video. But yeah, Heart of Ender, which is the most annoying cluster mess of a boss in the game, is an enchanted enemy, so yeah, just saying, Enchanted demolishes it. And because it's such a good enchant, it works best on any weapon whatsoever. Like, if you have a damage enchant on your weapon, even if it's a built-in one, you want Enchanting first and foremost if you can get it. The last one being the best damage enchant, and probably the best new enchant that's come out of the Echoing Void DLC, is Void Strike. And this is a really weird enchant, and my one video that was about it, I don't remember when I recorded it, it might have been 1 or 2 weeks ago, maybe longer, has a bit of misinformation. It did come from my own testing, but Void Strike is really weird. I still don't fully understand how it works, but it's not, even with consistent attack speed, say if you're using a pickaxe, which hits the same damage and the same speed, it's not consistently the same damage increase, so it led me to think that Void Strike was actually a flat damage modifier, but it is, in fact, a full damage multiplier, which makes it so much better. But anyway, in most cases, when it comes to an overall damage enchant, this is the best one. When you hit an enemy with a weapon enchanted with this, it applies a Void debuff that lasts for about 5 seconds, creating a rising damage multiplier on that mob, which goes up to plus 600%. And that rising lasts for 3 to 4, maybe 5 seconds, but in my testing it seemed to drop off, like in the last second. I'm not entirely sure, like I said, it's still somewhat of a mystery to me. But this right here, it might sound overpowered, but there is one drawback to this enchant. And that is, every time that you hit an enemy with Void Strike, it reapplies the debuff, which resets the multiplier. This means that the faster that your weapon hits, the more frequently you're reapplying this debuff, which means the less extra damage that your next hit is going to do, because you're not letting enough time go by for the damage multiplier to rise before the next hit. However, even if your build has 125% more attack speed, which does hurt Void Strike a little bit, any weapon that is sword speed or slower will still give you an overall 50 to 60% more damage increase, and even a faster weapon like a Tempest Knife, you'll still get about a 40% damage increase with all of those factors, making Void Strike better than Crit and Committed if you don't have Cowardice. Actually, I need to fix that part of the guide because Cowardice is a flat buff, which doesn't matter because Void Strike is a multiplier, but there is a case for a Tempest Knife where even Void Strike could be better, because Void Strike doesn't just multiply your melee damage, it multiplies any damage that the mob takes. So if other players are hitting them with range damage or stuff like that, then Void Strike is really helpful. And also, since it applies a rising damage multiplier that will keep increasing for 5 seconds as long as you don't reapply the debuff, you can hit an enemy with your weapon and run or dodge their attacks for a few seconds before returning to hit them again for massive damage, basically cashing in on that multiplier. So, Void Strike allows you to essentially deal damage to an enemy while not actively constantly attacking them, so it allows you to maintain high DPS while allowing yourself time to safely dodge enemy attacks in between. So you don't have to just stay still hitting them, you can hit them once, dodge around an attack that you have to, come back and hit them, and basically be like you were hitting them the whole time. And weapons that have this built in are the 2 new dual wield weapons from the End DLC, being Void Touch Blades and Beginning and the End. But weapons that it works best on is anything that is Tempest Knife speed or slower. If you're going faster than that, you're not getting as much damage out of it unless you plan to hit the enemy and then hit them much later, but those weapons tend to hit weaker per hit as well, so it's best to use slower weapons that hit stronger anyway. Also, as a side note, the jungle poison from Vine Whip and Encrusted Anchor, which is already insanely high, increases with every single tick if the weapon also has Void Strike when you hit the enemy, because the damage multiplier is rising, meaning that the poison is rising too. As long as you don't hit them again with your weapon anyway. So on top of this giving great raw damage per second to the Encrusted Anchor because of how slow it is, this allows you to do a lot of free poison damage with just one hit, making you free to focus on evading. With these 2 weapons on a poison focus build, most of the time one hit is enough to kill any mob, even if it's a boss. And I do have a more recent video showing that, even with a Vine Whip, me one-shotting just bosses, mini-bosses, enchanted enemies, even with protection, it's insane. Anyway, that does it for the damage enchants. Next we're moving on to defense, which is a very important enchantment, which is worth having at least 1 slot for. It's, I would say, as important as healing and damage are. When combined with defense, you become unstoppable. There are only 2 enchants in this category, but both are incredibly useful. The first one being Weakening. When you hit an enemy with your weapon, it applies a debuff that drops their own damage by 40%. This is useful in many instances, such as some soul builds, since they lack raw melee capabilities. So dropping the damage that enemies are dealing to you while you're farming souls is really useful. It's also useful in multiplayer since it means that the enemies aren't just doing less damage to you, but also less damage to your partner as well. Weakening is most effective when paired with weapons that either have a wide area of effect to hit as many mobs at a time as possible, so you're weakening more of them at a time. It's also, though, good on weapons using gravity to pull enemies in and make sure that they're all getting weakened with those attacks. Keep in mind, though, that this does not drop the damage of enemy burning, fire trail, or electrified enchants. And when combined with player damage reduction, at least if it's the 35% armor damage reduction, weakening doesn't actually multiply the way it should. Instead of being 40%, it comes out to more like 25 to 30% extra damage reduction, but still very solid. In fact, it's so solid that the weapon that has it built in, which is Nameless Blade, is one of the... It's meta in a sense that it's really good, just not meta in the sense that players are using it a lot, because most players are still hung up on Fighter's Bindings, Cursed Axe and Whirlwind, as well as the new weapons as well, but it is definitely up there in usefulness just for that built-in weakening alone. But other weapons that use it really well would be ones that include a 360-degree hit to hit all enemies around you. So that would be the Axe is a 360-degree hit. These dual blades have a 360-degree hit. Maces have a 360-degree hit, and double axes and anchors always hit all around you, even if they're not... Like, the anchor doesn't always do full damage to every enemy that you're hitting if they're all surrounding you, but they will all get weakened the same. And then other weapons that use it well are ones like Bone Club, you got the Scythe weapons, the Cutlass weapons. They all have very wide swings, and the Hammer of Gravity because it has gravity built in. And again, like I said, other weapons that use it well are anything with gravity built in. Now though, for an even better defensive enchant overall, which is Guarding Strike. This is the epitome of an OP enchant, because every time that you kill an enemy, you take 50% reduced damage for 4 seconds, so every kill you get, you are cutting incoming damage in half for more than enough time for you to get another kill. That on its own is huge. It could mean that you don't need to use Ironhide Amulet just by itself, but it's especially good because it reduces all incoming damage by 50%, aside from things like the Wither effect, which is bullcrap anyway. But this will reduce enemy burning, thorns, fire trail, and electrified damage, etc. But what's even better is that, unlike weakening, when you stack it with Ironhide Amulet, it does give you 75% damage reduction, meaning that it divides all incoming damage by 4, because it is cutting that 50% damage in half, so it's cutting another 25% total off of that, so it's really good. If you pair it with armor that already has 35% damage reduction, you basically have constant 80% damage reduction effect, since 35% damage reduction for some reason, unless they fixed it, it downscales to 20% reduction when it's stacked with other reduction for some reason. So you'll go from 50% total damage reduction with Ironhide Amulet to 60% with the built-in armor reduction, which is, if you're taking 50% damage, cutting 10 out of that is 20% of 50. And if you have 75% reduction with Ironhide Amulet and Guarding Strike, you then go up to 80%. And since 75% reduction means you're taking 25%, you're reducing 5 of that, and 5 is 20% of 25. So yeah, it's consistently not stacking the way that it should. I'm guessing Mojang doesn't really fully grasp math. I'm not sure what's going on there. Yeah, this enchantment is so powerful that when combined with 2 decent damage enchants and an appropriate healing enchant, you can make it through levels easily without having to use a health potion even once. Even if your build isn't the most synergistic, like if you're using, say, Burning and Fire Focus on Fox Armor while using, say, a Firebrand on Fiery Forge.
Not saying I've done that before, but I have a video of me doing that, and yeah, it's really good.
It's crazy though, you only need to get 1 kill every 4 seconds to become invincible, so because of that you want as much damage as possible with your weapon. So I would generally go with 2 damage enchants, but if you're using lifesteal armor you can get away with 3 with no healing. But yeah, because it's such a good enchantment, weapons that use this best is every weapon, but the more damage per second the better. So things like Coral Blade or Bee Stinger weapons, or rapiers in general, they don't have the damage per second to make the best use of Guarding Strike, but they still use Guarding Strike amazingly, and to be honest, they don't really, at least the Bee Stinger, and I keep saying Bee Stinger just because it's the best of the rapiers, but all of them don't really need Guarding Strike. Anyway, on to the last category for weapon enchants is utility. And utility is sort of an outlier compared to the other three enchant categories because it can work as healing or damage or even for defense. Also, while I said that it's best to generally have 2 damage, 1 defense or utility, and 1 healing enchantment, you can break the rules and comfortably use 3 utility enchants on a weapon. And I actively do this with a lot of weapons, including my rapier weapons, because utility is so good. Mainly, you'll see a theme here. The faster a weapon is, generally the better they make use of these utility enchants. So the first one, probably the least useful of all of them, is chains. This gives you a 30% chance every hit to bind up to 7 or 8 enemies for 3 seconds, which prevents them from moving at all. This is very useful for keeping potentially deadly mob clusters from all advancing on you at once so that you can safely 1v1 each one of them. Since it's a percentage chance to trigger every hit, this means that the faster your weapon is, the better that it is, and it also works either in tandem with shockwaves so you can pick off the enemies that are chained from a distance, or you can use it with stunning so that you can stun lock each enemy that you're hitting 1v1 while the other enemies can't get close to you. This does not stop enemies from attacking though, so if the enemy you're actively hitting is really close, it can hit you, or if it's a ranged enemy that's bound, it can still shoot at you. Still though, very useful. It's, like I said, not as useful as the other utility enchants here, but very solid if you're using it on any of these weapons here, which includes basically anything that is cutlass speed or faster. It's also built into the Jailer's Scythe and the Flail, which aren't the fastest weapons, but it works fairly well for them. I just would not waste an enchantment slot for it. So it's nice that it's built into them. Next we have Soul Siphon, and while it doesn't have as much widespread use as Chains, it is so good for what it does. So this enchant, just like Anima Conduit and Enigma Resonator, is only found on some soul weapons, and it inherently gives your build +1 soul gathering per kill. When you land a hit with your weapon, you have a 5% chance of causing 6 soul orbs to spawn, each that are worth however much soul gathering your build has. This is not only useful for gathering souls for your soul artifacts, but it also drastically increases your crit chance with Enigma Resonator because it's filling your soul meter more, and it gives you massive healing from Anima Conduit because you're getting a lot more soul orbs at a time. When combined with Snowball on your armor, which itself kind of looks like a little soul circling you, you can single out one beefy and stunnable enemy and just keep hitting it safely because it's stun locked. So you can farm souls with Soul Siphon. Obviously, this is only useful in soul builds, but it is an absolute staple on them, both on your melee and ranged weapon, for the best use. Like, if you have a soul build that doesn't have Soul Siphon, you're doing it wrong. And weapons that have this built in is the Eternal Knife, meaning that it inherently has +2 soul gathering because of that. The downside is, though, that at level 1 you only get 2 soul orbs, but it's still not bad for having a free soul enchant built into it, so you don't have to worry about being at the mercy of the random number generator. But just like Anima Conduit and Enigma Resonator, the weapons that it works best on is also the only weapons that can get it, which is the Soul Size and the Soul Knife weapons. After that, then, we have potentially the most broken of the utility enchants, and as you can see, these aren't really listed in order of their usefulness. That is why stunning isn't last or second last. But yeah, this is technically a defense utility enchant with the way it works. This gives you a 15% chance every hit that you land to stun every enemy that you're hitting for up to 3 seconds. Like I said, potentially one of the most broken enchantments in the game, because it stuns roughly once every 6.6 hits and it lasts for 3 seconds. Weapons that land over 4 hits a second can really comfortably keep enemies stun locked indefinitely until they're dead, so that they can never hit you. The faster a weapon is, the better stunning works on it. And even better if that weapon has a bit more reach for cushion so that you're hitting the enemy before they get close enough to hit you, so you have more time to stun them and then proceed to stun lock them. With the right enchantment setup, this can make you immortal even without Ironhide Amulet or Gong of Weakening to protect you, with the exception of bosses, mini-bosses, Ancients, and some stronger enemies that cannot be stunned, obviously. This is especially nice when paired with Gravity to funnel enemies into the stun lock so that they all can't attack you. Even if you have a low damage per second weapon, you can safely kill even an enchanted creeper before it explodes with faster weapons. A listing of all compatible weapons by hits per second at optimal attack speed, which means if you have 125% more attack speed from a Death Cat Mushroom in either Spider Armor or Renegade Armor. That would be Battle Staff, which hits 4.6 times a second. It is faster than Battle Staff of Terror and Growing Staff. Void Touch Blade line has 5 hits per second. Cutlass and Nameless Blade has 5.5 hits a second. Since Dancer's Sword has Rampaging built in, on average it's like 5.8 hits a second. Backstabber has 5.8 hits a second as well. Because of Echo, which is level 1 on a fast weapon, not really great, but for Swift Striker you have 5.9 hits a second. The Tempest Knife line has 6.3 hits a second, but they do have a lot of knockbacks, so I wouldn't fully recommend it on them, per se, but it still works. You got the Coral Blade line, which is 6.4 hits a second. The Sickles have 7.1 hits a second. Gauntlets have 8.4 hits a second. The Maulers, because of the built-in rampaging, have 8.8 hits a second. All the daggers have 9.3 hits a second. All the rapiers at max speed have 11.6 hits a second. And finally, the king of attack speed, Fighter's Bindings, coming in at 15.1 hits per second, so you're stunning more than twice every second. It's crazy. Now there is the Saw Blade line, which has 8 hits per second, but I wasn't sure where to place them because Gravity only triggers every other hit, and Radiance seems to never trigger any 2 hits in a row in all the times I've used it, so this leads me to think that on-hit Chance and Chance can only have a chance to trigger every other hit. So it could be actually 4 hits per second for stunning, but the other downside is that the weapon can overheat, so you have to pause your combo every now and then, which still slows it down a little bit. Also, as a side note, stunning pairs really well with ambush, as I've mentioned before, because stunned enemies count as not targeting you. So on certain weapons, it pairs really well. Weapons that have stunning built in are the Highland Axe, and the ones that it works best on, every weapon that I basically listed here, because of their attack speed. Highland Axe even, not too bad for it, it's just its hit speed leaves a lot to be desired for that. Next then we have Echo. You've heard me talk about this before. I don't have the best opinion of Echo in general, but I have actually found a use for it. Let me tell you what that is. So this enchantment, how it works is it gives you an extra slightly faster echoed attack that triggers every 3 seconds, meaning that, say if you're landing 5 hits a second, you're getting a bit less than 1 extra hit's worth of damage every 15 hits, which is about 6% more DPS on those kinds of weapons. So normally, yeah, Echo's really bad. However, on incredibly slow weapons like the Anchor, or Encrusted Anchor, if you're only doing Mushroom attack speed, this doesn't work if you have 125% or more attack speed, but if you have Mushroom speed with an Anchor, you actually get 50% more attack speed because it triggers every other hit. But you can also replicate this if you just use an artifact right after landing a hit, since it resets your attack animation and does the same thing as Echo anyway. In my Snowball Enchanted Creeper video, I showed myself using just a non-gong of weakening hit Bone Club, hitting 2 Enchanted Creepers 3 times really fast because I used my Death Cat Mushroom and Ironhide Amulet to go boom, boom, boom! And yeah, it just killed him really fast, so Echo was not needed. In fact, it did better than Echo would have done. So, yeah, it's not that good, but for one utility use, it's actually worth using. And that is for the Soul Knife weapons on a Soul build, because they are very slow Soul weapons. On a Soul build, unlike their Scythe brothers, they don't make good use of weakening because they don't have they hit really narrow, so they don't have as much wide reach to hit more enemies at a time to weaken more enemies. But because they are so slow, they can make use of Echo to get as many extra hits as possible for triggering Soul Siphon. It's also decent damage when it triggers because Soul weapons, they don't melee too often, and those 3 weapons hit really hard with each attack, so you're not going to be having a lot of attack speed anyway, because the faster your weapon is, the worse Echo actually is, because it's timed and not based on your speed. But Soul Knives, really slow. Soul builds don't use Mushroom really, and they hit pretty hard on average, so yeah, really good for farming souls. Not too bad for quick kills on some enemies that you can't one-shot, like some creepers. But yeah, for the weapons that it's built in on, it lets you make really good, well, at least better use of Gravity and Gravity plus Stunning, respectively. That being Whispering Spear, because if you use it with Gravity, because the spear has such long reach, you can hold mobs at a point really far away from you so they can't hit you, and the pushback from the spear can keep them from getting close enough to hit you for a long time. So the extra little hit now and then from Echo actually does help with that. You can do hitless runs. Don't know why you would try it unless you want to make a video about it like I did. But with Whispering Spear, yeah, it's possible to do hitless runs with that. Fortune Spear too, but Echo really does help. And then you got Swift Striker, because even though it's already a fast weapon, the fact that you might want to use it with stunning, that little bit of extra attack speed does help, at least a tiny bit, as a built-in. But besides that, yeah, the weapons that use it best are Anchors and Soul Knives, but more so the Soul Knives for the utility of farming with Soul Siphon. Otherwise, just use Artifact Canceling, it's better. Thing is, though, that Soul builds don't really have Artifact Canceling that doesn't spend souls, that's why you would want to use that instead of Artifact Canceling on them. Next then we have Busy Bee. This enchantment has a 40% chance for you to summon a bee with every enemy that your weapon kills with a maximum of 3. This normally is not a useful enchantment to actively pick on your weapon over other enchantments because 40% is kind of not needed when you cap out at 3 bees anyway, but it's really good as a built-in for Bee Stinger. Like I said, absolutely amazing, because like I said, they already cap at 3 bees, and you can summon 3 very fast with your kills. And the bees provide a great distraction to break up enemy aggro, they can help kill other enemies, and they can make creepers explode away from you. And you can just keep on making more and more bees with your weapon, and it gives you a reason to actually want to use Beast Burst for an enchantment slot on your armor. As an enchant by itself, you notice it's not really great. This was just me saying to try out the Bee Stinger, because what it lacks in DPS, it doesn't need it. It doesn't need damage per second, it doesn't need Guarding Strike, it doesn't need Ironhide Amulet, it doesn't need Gom, it doesn't need any of that to be amazing. If built right, it's one of the most make the game so easy you can turn off your brain weapons that you'll ever use. And naturally, weapons that have Busy Bee built in is Bee Stinger, and weapons that it works best on is just Bee Stinger. Just seriously, try it out. Such a good enchant. So next we've got Refreshment. This enchantment reduces your health potion cooldown time by 3 seconds with every mob that your weapon kills. Kills, though, from enchantments like Swirling and Thundering do not count. On its own, this can be classified as a healing utility enchant, but when you combine it with Potion Barrier Armor, it becomes a full defense utility enchant. Health potions take 45 seconds normally to recharge unless you're using Hero Armor, that's 27 seconds, and Potion Barrier normally lasts 9 seconds unless you're using the Troubadour, where it increases by about 1/3, so it's like 11 point something seconds. And also if you're using Stalwart Armor, since it has Potion Barrier built in, you only get 5 seconds. So normally, if you're using armor that has 45-second potion cooldown, if you take out the 9 seconds from Potion Barrier, that means you have 36 seconds, or 18 with Hero's Armor, time where your health potion is cooling down and you don't have Potion Barrier active. So you only need to get 12 kills or 6 with Hero's Armor within those 9 seconds of Potion Barrier to be able to use it with Refreshment again and again and again. And I have a video that I just uploaded before where I was using a Refreshment Whirlwind, even just with Crit and Committed, because this was pre-Echoing Void DLC, with my Hero's Armor, and I was able to keep Potion Barrier up pretty much constantly, because I only have to get 6 kills in 9 seconds while it's active, so it's so good. You want to really mainly focus on 2 damage enchantments on your weapon so you can get as many kills as quickly as possible, though weapons with a wide area of effect use this enchantment best because you can kill more mobs at a time. Again, like Whirlwind or Cursed Axe. It's also really fun to pair with Surprise Gift on your armor too, which I also have on that build, because you get constant like Strength Potion or Shadow Brew. It's really helpful. Weapons that it works best on is every weapon. Just like Guarding Strike, the more damage per second you have, the better. And then next we have Exploding. This is a damage utility enchant that causes every mob killed by your weapon, kills from things like Swirling and Thundering, again, do not count, but it makes those enemies explode, damaging nearby enemies for 60% of that mob's health at the time that it died. Well, not when it died, I mean like 60% of that mob's max health. So if it was enchanted when it died, but it was normally not enchanted, it would take out 60% of its enchanted health from enemies, which is really good for destroying entire groups. It is impossible though, because of how this works, to calculate the damage per second that this enchantment adds, because it depends on the HP of the enemies that you're killing, but it is especially effective on both weapons with gravity for keeping enemies grouped up into the explosions for concentrated damage, and ones that also have very low base damage per second, since exploding damage will matter more to them. On top of this, mobs that explode from exploding cannot revive with the mob resurrection or enchant, making Abominable Weaver much easier. And I have a video of me using my exploding gravity stunning radiance bee stinger, just destroying it. Anyway, weapons that have this built in are Cursed Axe and Battle Staff of Terror, making it really great for fighting Abominable Weaver. But also, weapons that it works best on would be, say, Hammer of Gravity, because it has gravity built in, the Rapier line, because they use gravity really well, but also they have low damage, Coral Blade, because it has really low damage, and it can use gravity pretty well, and also the Anchors, because they have gravity built in, but also enemies that die get flung straight up into the air, so they rain down as carpet bombs just all over the place. But as a side note, the enchant works fine on pretty much any weapon. And to wrap up the weapon enchantment segment of this video, there is Gravity. This enchant, when you hit an enemy with your weapon, pulls in nearby mobs to that spot and holds them there for 2 seconds, aside from some bugs where the enemies ignore gravity for a second, which is really annoying. Get on that, Mojang, fix your crap. On top of a lot of other stuff that you guys have to fix. But Gravity is a more peculiar utility enchant that lets it both operate as a damage enchant and as a defense enchant. In terms of damage, it groups enemies into your hits so that you're hitting more enemies at a time, sucking them up like a black hole to kill groups faster. But it can also work better defensively. For starters, you won't be stopping all mobs from swarming on you in Apocalypse plus 25. They're really fast, they're pretty bulky, so if you're like, oh, but it pulls the enemies to me, you can't stop that anyway. Not while you're attacking groups of enemies in front of you, and there's enemies that are coming up maybe from behind or the sides. Meanwhile, the other mobs at your sides and or your rear are hitting you for free. Gravity helps pull enemies from your flanks so that they're not hitting you for free, and helps you kill them quicker so, you know, they're not hitting you for as long. And if a creeper is slowly advancing on you while you're attacking an enemy group, it can, and will, normally explode just out of your weapon's reach while still damaging you, but gravity pulls it in early so that you can kill it with your weapon before it has a chance to explode. But on top of funneling enemies into things like weakening or stunning or thundering or swirling, the best use of gravity is when used on very long reach weapons, because hitting enemies at the tip of that reach will hold mobs at a distance so that they simply cannot attack you back, because they're too far away for it to trigger their attack AI. At least not until they're either drastically softened up or straight up killed completely, so it completely neutralizes them. If a weapon has rapier reach or longer, and especially if it has rapier speed, you can keep most mobs from attacking you at all, to where hitless runs are possible without abusing artifacts or ranged weapons. Because I've done hitless runs with both a bee stinger on a trial where it had negative 75% health, and I did have deflect, and half of melee mobs were replaced with pillager, but with those melee mobs, based on the damage they did to my girlfriend, they one-shot her, so I made it through that without getting hit, because I would have otherwise lost a life. But yeah, aside from long-reach weapons, gravity is also, it just really benefits weapons that have a more narrow or tiny hitbox, because it helps pull the enemies into that hitbox and make up for the lack of reach. And it's also good for weapons with low reach and high knockback, which would include all of the gauntlets that aren't Fighter's Bindings or the Tempest Knife weapons. For them, it's almost mandatory. And even though with gravity, a whip or vine whip can still only deal full damage to the most direct mob that you're hitting, and if you look at my Ancient Hunt video with the vine whip, you will notice that even if I'm hitting a group all at the same time, only one enemy is taking full damage and the others are taking 10% damage. Still, their reach makes gravity still insanely useful for defense, especially if you're hitting mobs behind walls or around corners. Just like with you're using, like, say, a glaive or any spear weapon. You can hit them around corners and they have to run around that corner to get to you. Meanwhile, you're hitting them and holding them and keeping them from running as effectively, and they just die before they can reach you. Weapons that have this built in are Hammer of Gravity and the 2 Anchors. And the weapons that use it best, like I said, are ones with either shorter reach, narrow reach, like pickaxes, you got daggers, you've got hammers. Because they're a bit narrow, you've got the gauntlets, Fighter's Bindings, sickles, katana, glaives, spears, battle staffs, soul knives, maces, whips, rapiers, tempest knives, saw blades. You got the coral blades. You've got Starless Knight, actually, because it has a built-in shared pain ability, which is really good for enemies grouped up. And then you've also got the Backstabber line and the Void Touched Blade line as well. Okay, so moving on from weapon enchants, we can get into a little bit less for enchants, and I want to talk more about artifacts, because these are one of the most important things for your build. More than, I would say, an artifact slot is more important than an enchantment slot in most cases, at least for armor. But it does depend, because there are some really important enchantment slots. It's just, if you can accomplish something with an enchantment slot, it's better to waste an enchantment slot for that instead of an artifact slot, if possible. Because you can get a lot of use from other artifacts instead, if that were the case. This is generally in order from the best artifact to the worst, but somewhere along the line I kind of was just then adding stuff as I was thinking of them off the top of my head, which anything that was useful, but also adding things with the additions from DLC, because I wasn't going to reorder everything. But these first few, anyway, are in order. Number 1 being Death Cap Mushroom. This boosts your attack speed by plus 100% and your movement speed by plus 20%. These aren't multiplicative, so it does just create an addition to your movement and attack speed buffs, but still it is the best artifact bar none due to it basically doubling your damage per second and increasing your movement speed to not only make escaping enemies or moving around attacks easier, but also for chasing them down. Doubling your DPS also works defensively because you're not only killing threats faster before they can hurt you too much, but you're also doubling your hits per second and killing speed to indirectly double the healing per second that you get from both leeching and radiance. And at 251 power, this has 21.2 second duration, and it takes 30 seconds to recharge, or 18.6 seconds with cooldown, meaning if you have this at a decent enough power level and you have cooldown in your armor, you can use this infinitely. And it's used for speedrun builds, melee builds, and has a place in any build, and it pairs best with stunning weapons because hit speed matters the most with that. I guess that also, though, goes for, like, say, swirling or thundering, just damage in general, actually. Number 2 would be Ironhide Amulet. This increases your damage reduction by 50%, effectively cutting all damage that you're taking in half, or roughly, since, like I said, it stacks weirdly with 35% damage reduction. It works well on anything, but pairs the most effectively on armor with no damage reduction. It also is recommended to forego this artifact if your build specializes in something that leaves no room for it, primarily if your build avoids direct melee contact 95% of the time. Because if you're not really going to be getting hit, then you would have room for maybe more useful artifacts for your build. Just like the mushroom, this has 21.2 second duration at 251 power, but it only has 25 second cooldown, so it doesn't need to be at as high of a power before you can infinitely cycle it with cooldown, as long as you can get it to last over 15.5 seconds. And it's used primarily on melee builds, because with those you're getting in close and getting hit, or builds that are incorporating lots of melee. Like I said, you can forego it on ranged builds or artifact builds if you're not really going to be engaging the enemy at all, because why need damage reduction if you're not getting hit? Next would be Gong of Weakening, and in some ways this could be better than Ironhide Amulet, it's just that it can't be used infinitely. How this works is, it affects all mobs in a ranged area around you, dropping their damage by 25%, but also multiplying all damage that they take, whether it's physical or indirect damage, by 3. For any situation, especially if you're using melee, Gong of Weakening is a Get Out of Death 3 card, defending you and also allowing you to quickly eliminate the dangerous enemies threatening you, which can make it also more defensive as well because the enemies aren't hitting you anymore. This also helps with burst leeching healing and quick triggers of Guarding Strike and or Refreshment. And at 251 power, this lasts 10.6 seconds on any mob, but the question is, will those mobs even last 10.6 seconds? Because even bosses don't live very long under Gong. And it does take 20 seconds to recharge, so you'll get 12.4 seconds with 1 cooldown, 7.7 seconds if you have 2, so there could be a reason you want to use 2 cooldown on your armor, even if you're using these 3 artifacts here and these 2 only need 1. Very useful for this. And it's used for any combat build, especially melee, since all damage that the mobs take is tripled. Even on a satchel build, you could run 1 satchel and 1 gong if you want that to just triple the damage and nuke everything. Downside being that it does take some time to recharge, so you can't double tap stuff. Next then you have Power Shaker. This charges your weapon with 4 explosions, which do over 1.7 million damage at 251 power that trigger on hit. Not only does it add a lot of damage to those 4 hits, but each explosion hurts all enemies around it, making it devastating against groups. They shine best on medium speed weapons that have not too much base damage, but aren't too fast where they'll blow the explosives on a mob that is already going to die from 1 or 2. Like on a rapier, for instance, if the enemy doesn't have enough health to survive 1 explosion, your rapier is going to hit 4 times before the first explosion even hits them, so you'll waste your explosions right there. However though, it is so good with its flat damage you could use a power 114 freezing foil on Apocalypse plus 25 and kill very well. Downside being that the healing from Radiance at that power is crap. With that though, yeah, use with caution because the explosions can block leeching, so even though it's not really great on fast weapons, that means it's used on weapons that use leeching, which means you could block it, but the damage that it does, especially when paired with Gong, is insane. You can destroy Weaver, actually you can destroy it with just a Gong, but Power Shaker on top of that annihilates it. The charge lasts itself for 14 seconds, if it's not used by then, and it takes 8 seconds to recharge after, like, the effect is worn off. 5 seconds though with 1 cooldown. Used primarily with melee builds and pairs very well with Gong for eliminating huge clusters. Next we've got Satchel of Elements. Satchel of Elements, when used, will target up to 7 enemies within an area around you and either 1. Strike them down with powerful lightning, 2. Light them on high damaging fire. I wanted to say light them on fire for high damage, but same thing. The fire lasts for a little bit, but it comes out to more damage than the lightning. It just takes longer for it to do that damage. And 3, quote, freeze them to slow their movement / attack speed for a few seconds. This artifact is extremely powerful, especially for Splendid Robe and especially with Fire Focus and Lightning Focus. The damage per cast can easily hit over 17 million, though it can have a place on melee builds or other builds too. The drawback is that the freezing effect is nigh useless. The speed drop is hardly noticeable, and if it triggers many times in a row, it can be bad, especially if you're going against enemies advancing on you with, say, burning or something and you gotta kill them quick. Though, luckily, that is only a 1/3 chance each time for it to trigger. For this reason, pairing 2 of them on a satchel build instead of 3 is recommended, with either Corrupted Seeds or Windhorn for support, in the event of multiple freezing triggers, because you can use the seeds to either hold the enemy in place to let your satchel recharge, or Windhorn to push them back and slow them for that as well. I didn't update this list for Shadow Shifter, but there is a Shadow Mage build you can run that does really good with 2 satchels and Shadow Shifter, as long as you have Shadow Surge on your Splendid Robe. Or if you're using, say, a Soul Dancer Robe with double cooldown in Fire Focus and Lightning Focus, because it has Soul Gathering on it. However, though, you could also use a Mushroom with strong melee as an option too, preferably if that fast weapon has stunning, or actually Guarding Strike works really well too, if you want to use a fully offensive Battle Mage. And like I said before, you could use Gong of Weakening with it, but it is massively overkill. Anyway, it has 7 targets maximum, and it takes 10 seconds to recharge, or 6.2 seconds with 1 cooldown, and 3.7 seconds with Splendid Robe. At least according to how math should work, but Mojang doesn't always... they don't always stack things the way that they should. It's also used primarily on Magic or Battle Mage builds, though it can be utilized on other builds as well. Then we've got the next one, the Satchel of Elixirs. This artifact crafts 2 random consumables out of Strength Potion, which is 100% more weapon damage, Swiftness Potion, which is 30% more movement speed, and Shadow Brew, which gives you invisibility for 10 seconds and plus 700% melee damage on that first hit, which will also end your Shadow form early. To give you an edge, and this is to give you an edge in combat. While it provides no defensive support like Gong of Weakening or Ironheart Amulet does, and Strength Potion damage isn't as much as what Gong adds, it can allow you to potentially keep a constant Strength Potion effect akin to running, say, Surprise Gift with Refreshment, though your odds of a Strength Potion with Satchel of Elixirs is much higher than what it would be with Surprise Gift, because Surprise Gift only has a 50% chance to give you 2 items, and one of them can be arrow bundles. So the drop pool's a bit bigger, and your chance of getting more drops is smaller. Also, the option to simply swap to Satchel of Elixirs when you're safe and you want a Strength Potion, and then swap back to another artifact makes it especially handy and makes it work on any build, because even if you have no opening for artifact slots, you can just swap to the Satchel and then swap back. Really easy, it's free. And it takes 30 seconds to recharge no matter what power it is, or 18.6 seconds with 1 cooldown. Useful on any build, mainly melee with Strength Potion, speed with Swiftness Potion, and mage with Shadow Bruise. And next you've got the Boots of Swiftness, which some like to use it for melee, though I don't care much about speed as much as I like survivability and just comfort in battle, and Mushroom Speed is fine for me, but this shines especially on speedrun builds. These give you plus 60% move speed for dashing around enemies to avoid hits. While this won't outspeed all enemies, and while this offers no defensive or offensive benefit in a combat situation, since if you're running melee you have to stop to attack anyway and you're not moving, the short cooldown makes it an okay choice for combat, especially when you're using builds that use artifacts for combat so that they can stay on the move. Like if you're using satchels or Updraft Tome or Blast Fungus, you can use those while moving, so Boots of Swiftness is really helpful for that. And it's an absolute staple for speedrunning. Paired with a Deathcap Mushroom, Ghost Cloak, Swift-Footed, Speed Synergy, and Tempo Theft on a build, and also if you have Rush now on your armor, you can reach insane top speeds. And it has 4-second duration at 251 power, and it takes 5 seconds to recharge, or 3.1 with 1 cooldown. It's used primarily and heavily for speedrun builds, but can be used for combat, preferably artifact combat. Next we've got the two most useful of the ranged artifact damage, I almost said enchants, but yeah, for ranged damage artifacts you've got Fireworks Arrow first. This charges up your next arrow shot with an explosive rocket that not only does over 1.5 million area damage on impact at 251 power, it also ignores enemy deflect and thorn, so it's really good for just any ranged build in general if you are tired of dealing with that stuff. And if you have multi-shot and chain reaction trigger when it's fired, those extra shots will also be rockets, making it ideal to pair both enchants on a harp crossbow when using this artifact. It's very effective to run 3 of them with 2 cooldown enchants on a piece of archer's armor if you have cooldown and chilling while the sorry, but yeah, if you have cooldown and chilling while your harp crossbow has infinity as well. This leads to runs where you can avoid melee contact entirely, because even though only 2 cooldown will not let you fully cycle your fireworks arrows perfectly, if you have infinity trigger on your harp crossbow while you have a rocket primed, it will cause the fireworks rocket that you have primed to start its cooldown, but you will still have the rocket primed for the next shot. So it kind of acts like a little bit of a better cooldown if infinity triggers at least like every other shot. It's really good. And if you have it triggering like crazy, then you can have constant rockets. It's insane. It is also though a fair choice in other builds that use ranged weapons with just multi-shot in general. And yeah, aside from the damage though, it takes 30 seconds to recharge, again 18.6 with 1 cooldown, and it's used primarily for archer armor builds, but it can be used on others that use a multi-shot bow or crossbow. Then we've got the other ranged artifact, which is Torment Quiver. This quiver requires 30 souls to use, and it charges your next 3 shots with an ethereal energy that passes through enemies, hitting them multiple times for about 400,000 soul damage per hit. This means it is boosted by Soul Focus, but even greater than that is, well, actually I should update this list because I think they say they fixed this bug, but I haven't tried it myself. But there was a bug where if you have Torment Quiver equipped and active and you have Dynamo, it applies the Dynamo damage for every hit, and it does not decrease your Dynamo stack as long as you have your Torment Arrows primed. They may have fixed this, but then again, they said that they stopped one-hit spawn kills on bosses, and they also fixed the bug with Luck of the Sea. And they didn't fix the first one, and they fixed the second while breaking it in another way, so don't trust their word for it. Especially when they say that invisible mobs aren't in the game. With poor mob rendering, it may as well still be in the game. But yeah, anyway, similarly with the fireworks rocket, if infinity triggers while you're firing your torment arrow, it will shoot the special arrow without using it up, so you can fire it again and it can trigger the artifact's cooldown early. So yeah, it'll start your torment quiver cooldown, but you'll still have it equipped. And this artifact thrives best with, funnily, Frostbite, surprisingly, and even Wither armor, but it works well for any armor, primarily ones that use Soul Gathering. And they are also, just like Fireworks Rocket, affected by multi-shot, and each hit can trigger Radiance Shot, which might give a slight reason to use it, but they did nerf Torment Quiver a little bit, where it doesn't pass through enemies quite as much, so it will stop a lot earlier, and it kind of gets burst hits on them. Anyway, it requires 30 souls to use, gives you +1 Soul Gathering for having each one equipped, and it takes 6 seconds to recharge, or... well, really, cooldown's not necessary. I didn't even calculate that, actually. If it's 6 seconds or less, you don't really need cooldown for it. And yeah, you primarily want to use it with Wither armor, though it also works really well on Frostbite for the extra range damage, or any build that's utilizing Dynamo. Because even if they did fix that bug, each hit should still apply the Dynamo damage, and it's really good. Next, we've got Windhorn. This artifact creates a shockwave around the user that pushes mobs back by up to 14 blocks, which is reduced on Apocalypse plus 25, but at least it pushes them back a little bit, because before it pushed them back like half a block, and I was like, why does it even exist at 169 power? Anyway, it massively also slows them down afterwards. So on its own, this artifact isn't really useful aside from maybe pushing mobs into pits, but like for melee, for instance, you will have to close the distance to attack enemies eventually anyway, and most ranged builds don't really need it. But for a build using Satchel of Elements, like I had said before, it is a godsend, because in the event that your 2 satchels get the freezing effect over and over and you have a ton of enemies coming after you, you can use Windhorn to hold them off and slow them down for your satchels to recharge again. And I consider it a main staple for a good satchel build, unless, like I said, if it is a Shadow Mage build, but that requires more specific enchantments. Like I said before, though, it pushes mobs back by 14 blocks at 251 power, and it takes 10 seconds to recharge, or at a minimum of 3.7 seconds if you have cooldown on a Splendid Robe, and primarily used for satchel support. Next we have Corrupted Seeds. This artifact will trap up to 8 enemies in an area around you and cause them gradual poison damage for about 3.3 seconds. This can be useful in itself for controlling the position or movement of enemies so that they don't all overwhelm you, but their real power lies in their ability to use multiple of them, especially if you have 1 or 2 cooldown, to keep enemies trapped indefinitely until they eventually die. Even just having 3 Corrupted Seeds equipped with no cooldown allows you to do this, though only to 8 mobs maximum. So you can cheese them out and kill them from a safe position without them ever being able to even move. This can also be used instead of Windhorn, though, for holding off enemies while using your Satchel of Elements. And damage-wise, it doesn't matter too much, but it does 230,000 damage at 251 power, 8 targets maximum, and has 10 seconds cooldown, or if you're using max cooldown, at least 1 cooldown on cooldown armor, 3.7 seconds. So you can do some crazy stuff with holding off enemies and just cheesing the hell out of them. And yeah, like I said, used for cheesing or for Satchel of Element support. Next we've got Ghost Cloak. Okay, I'll stop now. If you're too young for that, don't even worry what that reference is. This artifact not only turns the user into a ghost so they can run through enemies or other obstacles, except I don't think it works on Geomancer pillars anymore, sadly. It also gives you a speed boost too, making it a great tool for speedrunning. On top of that, I think it's 50% damage reduction that it gives you, but that makes it somewhat feasible for some fun melee artifact combat play too, allowing you to, say, run through an enemy or an enemy group and attack them from the other side, or to run through a group while dropping Blast Fungus on them, which I haven't really tried, but sounds really fun. And they're also really useful. They're useful enough that you could run 2 of them on a speedrun build for an acceptable option, because otherwise they aren't affected by cooldown the same way. You have to run maximum cooldown, like cooldown armor with 3 cooldown enchants to make it so you can infinitely cycle 1. Otherwise you would need 2 for constant ghost form without needing to use any other tricks. And yeah, at 251 power, it gives you 19% more speed, lasts for 3 seconds, and takes 6 seconds to recharge. Should be 3.7 with 1 cooldown. I don't think that's how it really works, though. I don't think Mojang really knows math all the time. Sometimes they do, but in this case, no, it doesn't work really well. But yeah, it's used primarily for speedrunning, but like I said, you can use it for a melee or artifact combat, or even ranged, actually, now that I think about it. Next then we have Lightning Rod. This artifact is for soul builds, first and foremost. It will target 1 enemy and drop a lightning bolt on them about a second later, dealing massive damage that will hit nearby enemies as well, which makes it a great pair with a Feral Soul crossbow that has gravity to pull other mobs towards that targeted one, but also I had originally been running it with a Void Collar, even more now that you can get Soul Siphon on it, but it's so good when you are on console especially and you can't just click whatever enemy you want to tag with lightning rods, so you just tag them, shoot them. Well, I think I described right here, you can use this to snipe enemies from far away, even behind multiple walls. But yeah, if you tag one enemy with it, you can shoot them then with your gravity bow, pull surrounding mobs into it, and they all get struck by that same bolt. It's so good. But yeah, while it can only target one mob at a time, as I said, like, it can hit other ones nearby. And the lightning damage does do more than any individual lightning strike from Satchel Elements. Still though, yeah, Satchel is much better. But while it is a soul artifact, it does lightning damage, so only lightning focus works on it, but it's very good for it. At 251 power, it deals almost 8 million damage, and it has 2-second cooldown and gives 1 soul gathering for having it equipped. And using it costs 15 souls. Yeah, its use is pretty much limited though to solely a soul focus build using Wither Armor or Soul Dancer Robe, though you could use it with unstable robes as well. Wouldn't fully recommend that, though. I'd use it for something else. Otherwise, though, you just want to run Satchel on any other build. Next, continuing the Soul hype train, we've got Corrupted Beacon or Corrupted Pumpkin, both the same thing, just a holiday reskin. This artifact is for soul builds as well. First and foremost, it fires a beam of soul energy that pierces all enemies, and Geomancer pillars as well. That's really huge. And as far as I know, it doesn't have any range limit, making it the best possible artifact for long enemy-filled stretches in any level, like the long hallways that are in Fiery Forge, or you've got the bridge near the end of Ark Haven, stuff like that. You just blast right across it and kill everything, especially with Soul Focus too. But it can be stopped by pots, chests, bushes, and other obstacles, even if you're not hitting those things directly, but otherwise it has no restrictions. It is great for softening up advancing lines of enemies and pairs well with either the 6% lifesteal from Wither Armor, so you get healing constantly from it, or you can use Soul Dancer Robe for 50% extra damage to kill things even quicker. And like I said, since it's soul damage, it works with Soul Focus, and this can just demolish any line of enemies that are coming at you before they can even get close enough to hit you. It deals almost 4 million damage per second at a rate of... before it was negative 20 souls per second, but it might actually be now 10, because I was dropping 2 souls at a time. I think it was dropping only 1 soul at a time, but it might actually be based on your soul meter. I have to check it. There's a chance that it could drop 2 souls every tick if you have Bag of Souls equipped, and 1 soul every tick if you don't, so it wouldn't matter if you had sold like a full soul meter or not. It would use the same percentage of your bar every second. That I have to look in on. I don't have my game running right now, but I'll test it and I'll put it in the description below if it does have any kind of change like that. But on top of that, yeah, it gives 1 soul gathering like all soul artifacts do, and it has 2.5 second cooldown, so again, soul builds do not need cooldown. Used solely for a soul focused build with Wither Armor or Soul Dancer Robe, but also can be used with unstable robes as well. And then for the last of the main 3 soul artifacts, we've got the Harvester. This artifact is also for soul builds, though it can have a place on armor that uses Final Shout, though that's losing a lot of favor because there's so few artifacts that work well with it. But the reason why is because Final Shout ignores the soul cost of artifacts. However, if you're using it on a soul build, you don't want to use Final Shout because it still will take up souls to use it. And you would rather want to have control over your Harvester, especially since it doesn't have a lot of cooldown. Anyway, the artifact creates a high damage blast around the user to damage all enemies in that area. It works well for healing with 6% lifesteal from Wither Armor or the extra damage from Soul Dancer Robe, and since the artifact doesn't interrupt attack animations, it can be used on a soul melee build that uses Titan Shroud with either Moon Daggers or Soul Fists. So while you're like pummeling at enemies and you want to keep hitting them, you can use your Harvester to do that little bit of extra damage without breaking your combo at all. And for that build, you would also want to use Ironhide Amulet and Deathcap Mushroom since it's a melee build. It works great for eliminating a cluster of smaller threats, especially creepers, in one blast, and it can decently damage beefier enemies too, though it is a costly soul artifact with longer cooldown than the others. Since it also deals soul damage like the others, it does work well with Soul Focus. So in its burst damage, it does over 3 million damage at 251 power, costs 40 souls per use, And I think that doesn't matter however much your soul meter is. I'll have to check that out actually. Maybe Bag of Souls isn't as good as I thought. That would be really stupid though if every soul artifact took a percentage of your meter, because that would completely invalidate the reason to have Bag of Souls at all. But I wouldn't put it past Mojang to do something stupid like that. They really don't think their stuff through. But again, in the description below I will make mention if that is the case. But yeah, just like the other artifacts, it gives +1 soul gathering and it takes 4 seconds to cool down. So out of the main 3 soul artifacts, that one takes the longest to cool down and it's still not that much. Just like the others though, it is used mainly for a soul build, either using Wither Armor, Soul Dancer Robe, Unstable Robes too, or if you're using a soul melee build with Titan Shroud. And then we've got one that's, I put it on here because I had really fun on my, I titled it Living Weaponry, but that build is so fun. It's with my Exploding, Stunning, Gravity, Radiance Beast Stinger on my Living Vines armor that has Swift-Footed, Cooldown, Potion Barrier, Chilling, because when you roll, it traps enemies. And then I just use my Imploding Crossbow that I always use, which I mentioned later here. And a Blast Fungus and Ironhide Amulet and Death Cap Mushroom. Just roll, drop Fungus while you're doing that. The enemies are stuck in place and it lands right on top of them. Gong is still better. This is just for fun. Otherwise, yeah, Blast Fungus is not that great. But yeah, while it's not a great artifact, it is fun to use with certain builds. It throws up a cluster of 5 fungus cubes that spread in a somewhat sporadic pattern. Oh god, I just realized my own pun that I made here, Spore Addict. Forgive me for that. I thought it was funny at the time. Oh god, I don't know, I just got myself with that though. I didn't even remember that I did that. Anyway, each one deals damage to any mobs near where those funguses land. This can be used in conjunction with, like I said, Living Vines armor to toss up cubes while rolling to trap mobs in place that they can't move away from the blast zone. Still, not the most effective strategy, but really fun. The cubes deal about 700,000 damage per cube at 251 power with 6 second cooldown. You don't really need to reduce the cooldown, but if you're using it on builds that use Ironhide Amulet and Mushroom anyway, the cooldown does help. Yeah, it's used primarily on builds with trapping power or high speed or mobility, since you want to drop the fungus on them without them being able to really hit you back. And then last we've got the Shadow Shifter. This artifact lets you enter Shadow form at the cost of 33% of your max soul bar. When you are in Shadow form, your next melee attack is boosted, like I said before, by 700% of the base damage, and your Shadow form can only be broken by performing a melee attack or if you land a ranged attack. Or you know, if the timer of it runs out. This makes it perfect for builds that use artifact damage like, say, from Corrupted Pumpkin, Beacon, Harvester, Lightning Rod, or Satchels for stealthy kills. And especially if you saw in one of my more recent videos, the Shadow Mage build, completely broken. Use it while they don't patch it. Or maybe they won't. They don't really do a whole lot for balancing stuff. Whether it's balances that would help us or balances that would hurt us. And then you have 26.5% second duration at 251 power. Like I said before, it costs 33% of your soul bar, gives +1 soul gathering, and has 10 second cooldown, or 6.2 seconds with cooldown. And used primarily for offensive soul builds and artifact builds. Just anything where you don't need to use melee or ranged, because if you're in shadow form for that long, you don't want to land an attack that's going to break that shadow form so quickly. You would want to capitalize that with like indirect damage, like from artifacts. It's just that soul artifacts aren't the best for it because kills with soul artifacts do not give you souls back. So ironically, it's a soul artifact that does not synergize the best on soul builds. It's kind of weird, but it's pretty fun. Like I said, use it while you can. The video I uploaded, if I upload this video next in the line of my videos that have been uploaded, it would be 2 videos ago. Just check out that Shadow Mage build to see how broken that Shadow Shifter is. Works on either Splendid Robe or really good for Soul Dancer for the same thing. Now next up we have the armor section of this guide, and the way that I ordered it might be a bit weird for you, and I even had to think about why I ordered it like this originally because it just felt like the right order for me, but I thought it would be better to talk first about how the enchantments work for them, because when I mention the armors I do then show enchantment combos, so here you can understand how they work and why I would pick these enchant combos for the different armors based on how the armors themselves work. So unlike weapon enchantments, there aren't as many armor enchantments that are as worth using, and for the most part you can get away with running the same setup for basically all armor, or at least the same 2 for each armor, and then 2 more that fit that specific armor or build. This part of the guide, though, is a quick rundown of those enchants, starting with the best of the best ones, and then kind of going down the line, but eventually I kind of just was adding ones that I was thinking of, so it's mainly only for the first few. The number 1 being cooldown. This enchantment reduces the cooldown for all of your artifacts by 38% each. Incredibly useful on its own, but you can stack multiple of them. However, since they stack multiplicatively, they will never reduce 100% of an artifact's cooldown, even if you stacked 3 cooldown with an armor that already has 40% less artifact cooldown already built in on it. If you did this, it would come out to about 86% more total cooldown, so not 100. Basically what happens is you would go from 100% of your cooldown to 62% with just 1 cooldown, and then you would reduce that 62% then by another 38%. You don't reduce the original 100 by 38% again. But just with 1 cooldown enchantment on your armor, it lets you infinitely cycle artifacts like Ironhide Amulet and Deathcap Mushroom once they hit a certain power, which is like around 200 or less. But having multiple can be nice for further reducing the cooldown of other artifacts. Like I'd mentioned before, Gong of Weakening goes from 12.4 seconds to 7.7 seconds, and Fireworks Arrow too. It works best on, there's no armor that can't use it, just any armor is good with this. You want it on pretty much anything that uses artifacts that aren't soul artifacts, anything else, or if you're using, say, maybe the Troubadour. I don't have that armor listed here, but it makes positive effects last 30% longer, so you can almost infinitely cycle a Deathcap Mushroom without cooldown. It's just then you miss out on other cooldowns, so still, on any armor, cooldown, very solid to have. Next, you've got Potion Barrier. This is an enchant that is best when not needed, but in those pinch events when it is needed, it is the most useful armor enchant that you can get. When you use a health potion, you get a barrier that reduces all damage you take by a whopping 90% for 9 seconds. When you're surrounded by an unholy spam of mobs or a group of nasty enchanted mobs that you cannot defeat without dying because it's just that bullcrap, this will absolutely save your life and give you the push that you need to take them out before they kill you. And this is found on Stalwart armor, so it's level 1, 5 seconds, which is still really good, but it works best on, again, any armor can use it. Next would be, you could say, the 4 horsemen of the general good armor enchants that you can pick between. That would be, first, Chilling. This enchantment creates a wide aura around you that will reduce all mob movement and attack speed by 60% for 1 second, and it triggers on all mobs within that aura every 2 seconds. So basically every other second the mob or mobs are being slowed down. This essentially means that they're doing 30% less DPS to you overall, which makes it handy for a defensive enchant for any build, especially on melee. But the one thing is, even though it is 30% less DPS, their hits are still going to hit you for full damage. It's just they're not hitting you as often. Yeah, it's found on Frost armor, level 1, still very useful, and it works best on, again, all armor can use it. Next would be Cowardice. This enchantment gives you a 40% boost to both your melee and ranged weapon damage while you're at full HP. The downside is that this buff is additive, so it doesn't multiply with most buffs, and you're not likely to stay at full HP to see a full 40% DPS increase at all times. Still though, pairs very well with Chilling, because mobs aren't hitting you as fast, you could potentially kill them before they kill you, and or it goes well with Deflect so that you can help maintain your full health, especially if you're going against melee enemies and there's ranged enemies in the back trying to shoot you and drop your damage. That can help save you from a shot that would otherwise take away your Cowardice. It also even works with Snowball too. Very helpful for ranged weapons like Imploding Crossbow, which can do massive damage with multi-shot, because all of that then is being multiplied by 40%. And again, works best on any armor. And like I'd mentioned just above, Deflect. This enchantment gives you a 45% chance to deflect any projectile attack that hits you, which not only frees you up from taking damage, but it reflects the hit back at the enemies that shot it at you, or at least in the exact same direction that the shot came from, but, you know, opposite direction, I guess you'd say. This is especially useful for preserving your HP when you have Cowardice, especially when used on armor that has a 30% chance to negate hits, because those two stack up together. Again, works best on all armor. And then we have the last of the 4 most useful general enchants, Snowball. This enchantment gives you a snowy companion, as it says, which circles around you and fires at a nearby enemy every second. When it hits an enemy, that enemy gets stunned for over 2 seconds, meaning that you can completely stun lock a single enemy in front of you, or even stun lock 2 if the snowball decides to alternate perfectly between them. Useful on soul builds for farming souls off of a single tough enemy when you're using Soul Siphon, because you can stun lock them and just hit them for free. And it can also prevent mobs from fleeing or teleporting away, and will stun lock any deadly creeper even if it's about to explode. Like if it's blinking, it'll stop it. Found on Frostbite, which, not really good that it's only level 1, but you don't use Snowball too much on a lot of armors because it's usually unnecessary. Doesn't mean it's bad, it's just unnecessary, but it still works on any armor, but especially good for soul builds. In fact, for soul builds, I will say it is a staple, because you don't have any souls when you start a level, so you cannot use your artifacts for support. You are stuck relying on your soul-built melee and ranged weapons, which are not good for melee by themselves. You can just see some of my, or even all of my soul build runs, especially the ones on Apocalypse plus 20 when it was even rougher. Snowball saved my life. That is why I've never taken it off. Also, it looks like a little soul surrounding your armor. Next we get to more nuanced enchants that are really good but on more specific setups or armors. The first being Swift-Footed. This enchantment will give you a base movement speed of plus 50% of a multiplier whenever you roll, cancelling out the slowdown that you get whenever you perform a roll. The downside is that you don't feel the full speed boost effect because of that slowdown, but it does result in each roll actually speeding you up by a bit. This is more useful in armor that likes to make use of performing strategic rolls, especially when your armor or build is built for rolling, but it's also good for speedrun builds as well. In fact, really good on speedrun builds. It's found naturally on Highland armor, and it works best on armors like Shadow Walker, Glow Squid armor, Living Vines armor, Verdant Robe, Ember armor, Ghost Kindler, or Goat Gear, all stuff which is for rolling. And more recently now also you can add unstable robes to that too, because of the explosion rolls, which the explosions don't do that much at 251 power. It's 306,000 damage, which is tickle damage, but still, that's an option there if you want to use it. Next, another rolling enchantment is Acrobat. This one reduces your roll cooldown by 40%, leaving you slowed down for less time after each roll. As opposed to Swift-Footed, this enchant is better on armors that roll for certain combat benefits that don't rely on movement speed for their strategies. It's found on Black Wolf armor and Living Vines armor, and it works best for Shadow Walker, Glow Squid armor, Ghost Kindler, or Goat Gear because they like to roll more often for their effects. And then we have the, I believe it's the last of the rolling enchants, Multi-Roll. This enchantment allows you to roll up to 4 times in quick succession. This is great for making quick escapes from a sudden, sudden burst damage, like say creeper explosions, as well as for triggering rolling effects such as Electrified, Tumblebee, or the invincibility from Shadow Walker and Glow Squid armor, and its ink too. I had recently realized that Glow Squid armor had invincibility on rolls. I overlooked that and I never used it for that. That makes it even better. Okay, the downside is that the speed drop that you suffer during your roll's cooldown lasts until all 4 of your rolls are recharged. So Acrobat is nice to mitigate that, though overall you will get more rolls per level from Acrobat since it nearly doubles how often you can roll. Well, multi-roll, it only adds 3 extra rolls flat. Its one main use is to save them up for situations where you want quick burst rolls just at a time. Because if you have time to let your rolls recharge and then you need to roll like a whole lot in one area, especially to spread ink around, multi-roll is very useful. This is found on Goat armor, only gives you, I think, 1 extra roll, but it works best on Shadow Walker, Glow Squid armor, and Ghost Kindler for their different effects, whether it be Ghost Form and Fire rolls, so you can roll through enemies back and forth, Glow Squid armor's ink, or Shadow Walker's invincibility. And Glow Squid armor. See, I keep forgetting it has that. Next, we've got Bag of Souls. This increases the maximum souls that you can carry by 100%, or actually you go from 300 to 599, but points to Mojang for attempting math. Like I said, they try. But it's not only good for storing up more souls so you can spam your artifacts more later, but it gives +1 to your total soul gathering, which is another staple for soul builds. However, if it turns out that all soul artifacts now take a percentage of your soul bar, they might have been doing that to help soul builds, but it just hurts them for Bag of Souls because it doesn't what good is having double the soul meter if it just means that the souls cost double the amount? That means you have to wait longer to build up your bar just to use the same amount of that bar. So I really have to see if they screwed it really badly, because yeah, Mojang doesn't know how to balance for crap. They know nothing about balance. And if I say that with a bit of salt or a bit of animosity, it's because yes, I feel they should be more competent than that. Anyway, onto the focus enchantments. We have Soul Focus, which is, another enchantment that's only really useful for soul builds. This enchantment increases all soul damage, shown in purple numbers, by 30%. Not to be confused though with Void Strike damage. Only really useful in builds that heavily utilize, say, Corrupted Pumpkin, Corrupted Beacon, and or Harvester, but they are a staple on those builds. Unfortunately, it does not provide more soul gathering. I don't know why. It works best on Wither Armor, Soul Dancer Robe, Frostbite, Titan Shroud, and Unstable Robes. See, I edited it there, but I didn't put Unstable Robes for other stuff. This guide is still a work in progress, but that's why I made this this video guide, so I can kind of add those little addendums to it. Next, though, we've got Fire Focus. This enchantment increases all fire damage, such as from Fire Aspect, Burning, Fire Trail, the fire from the satchels, etc. by 75%, and it acts as a full multiplier. Kind of stinks though that Soul Focus is only 30%, whereas these focuses are 75%. I thought Soul Focus should have at least been 50%, but it works fine, it's whatever. Mojang doesn't know how to balance. Anyway, for Fire Focus though, its novelty use is with weapons like Firebrand or anything that has Fire Aspect, or even with Burning, but its main use is on a satchel build for even more fire damage. If using on such a build, it's a pretty big staple no matter what armor that is using it. Otherwise, not much other fire damage is worth a slot for Fire Focus. Anyway, it works best on Ember Robe because it has it built in. Has Burning built in, Ghost Kindler because it has Fire Trail in it, Splendid Robe because it uses satchels really well, Cave Crawler because it has 50% more artifact damage, Sweet Tooth because it's just a reskin of Cave Crawler, or Golden Piglet Armor because it also has increased artifact damage as well. Then we have Lightning Focus. Like its fiery brother, this enchantment increases all lightning-based damage by 75%. But unlike its Kindled Kindred, it is much more useful because not only is it good for lightning strikes of, say, Satchel of Elements, it also boosts the damage of things like Thundering and Lightning Rod, both which have more use. This makes it useful in a variety of builds because of fast weapons that use Thundering and the soul builds that use Lightning Rod, especially when combined with, 50% more artifact damage. And this works best with, because of lightning or thundering weapons, it works best with Renegade Armor for, say, rapiers that use thundering, or coral blades, or even daggers. Highland Armor for using Fighter's Bindings that use thundering. Full Metal Armor as well for the same reason. Spider Armor or Stalwart Armor, again for same reasons before. Splendid Robe for satchels. Cave Crawler, Sweet Tooth, Golden Piglet Armor, also for satchels. Or you could use Wither Armor and Soul Dancer Robe, because Soul Dancer and Wither like to use Lightning Rod. Or even just for generally, if you want to use Fighter's Bindings with Thundering on a Wither build, you could use Lightning Focus for that extra damage along with the Lifesteal. And finally, we've got Poison Focus, the last of the focus enchants, and an enchant that's just as useful as it is useless. Reason is because Poison Cloud is a very lackluster enchant, and there's not much poison damage worth using, so you don't want really Poison Focus for it, except for Vine Whip and Encrusted Anchor. That poison damage per second is very high already, but it's also not only buffed by most damage enchants like Sharpness, Cowardice, Reckless, Pain Cycle, Void Strike, etc. It's also boosted by armor buffs, Strength Potion, Shadow Brew, and pretty much everything aside from Crit and Committed. But on top of that, Poison Focus multiplies the entire total poison damage by 75% too, so it doesn't stack flatly with those other flat buffs. So while it's not the most useful enchant overall, the builds that use Vine Whip and Encrusted Anchor, it's incredibly useful. And because of that, it works best on Renegade Armor, Highland Armor, Full Metal Armor, Spider Armor, Stalwart Armor, Wither Armor, anything that you would more feasibly want to use Vine Whip or Encrusted Anchor with. Mainly though, you would probably want to use Renegade Armor for most damage. But yeah, it works really well. When you have Poison Focus and Void Strike, even without Gong, you can one-shot most things. But with a Gong, one-shots pretty much everything easily. And next we have some more other nuanced enchants here. We've got Speed Synergy. Whenever you activate an artifact, your base speed increases by 20%, making this enchant great for speedrun builds centered around using artifacts like Boots of Swiftness and or Ghost Cloak, because not only do those also boost your speed, but you can use those very often to keep getting that constant speed boost. Otherwise, it doesn't have a whole lot of use, but it is a staple on those speed builds. So for that, it works best on Verdant Robe and Ember Robe, because those are the quintessential speedrun builds. More so Verdant Robe because the burning on Ember Robe can make enemies chase you even if you have Shadow Brew active, because it's been bugged for a while where enemies will sometimes aggro to you while you have Shadow Brew active, but they won't hit you, even though they shouldn't know where you are if you have that invisibility buff, but it is what it is. Also for this purpose, you can do this with a Evocation Robe, because it's basically the same thing as a Verdant Robe. The extra Soul Gathering of Verdant Robe doesn't really matter for a speed build. But what does matter for Soul Gathering is Shadow Surge, a soul enchant that when you kill a mob while in shadow form, such as from Shadow Brew or Shadow Shifter, you get up to 16 more souls from that mob. If using a soul build that uses Shadow Shifter, this is a handy enchant to have, or if you're using, say, a satchel build with a Splendid Robe, really broken. It doesn't give you +1 Soul Gathering by itself though, but honestly it doesn't need it with those builds. Unless Mojang nerfs it into the ground, I'm like, well then what purpose did you want Shadow Shifter for? Because on a soul build it's not really it's not the best because it's good for killing with soul artifacts, but then you don't get souls back for it to keep using it. But despite that, it still does work best though with Wither Armor, Soul Dancer Robe, Titan Shroud, Unstable Robe, and I forgot to put Splendid Robe in there, but it works so good for that too. Next then we have Surprise Gift. Whenever you use a health potion, you have a 150% chance to craft any item out of Strength Potion, Swiftness Potion, Shadow Brew, or an Arrow Bundle. And that 150% means that you do have a 50% chance to craft 2 things and a 100% chance to at least craft 1. It works very well on any armor that utilizes both Potion Barrier and if you have Refreshment on your weapon, especially if you have reduced health potion cooldown like from, say, Mystery Armor or Hero's Armor. And you can find this on Golden Piglin Armor, but since it is built in at level 1, you only have a 50% chance, so you won't get 2 items ever, and you will only get 1 item half the time. But it works best on any armor, especially if you're using Hero's Armor or Mystery Armor too, because it can have reduced potion cooldown. Then next we have Tumblebee. This enchant gives you a 101% chance to spawn a bee when you roll. Meaning I think you have a 1% chance to actually spawn 2 at once, but that's never happened to me. But looking at how all other chances that are above 100% work, I think that's how it would. There is a limit of 3 bees though with this enchantment, and also though because bees are fairly useful for diversion tactics, using this enchantment to create summons is more effective than wasting a precious artifact slot on a summon, which like I said before, artifact slots are a bit more useful than enchant slots, so it's more worth it to use an enchant slot to summon bees than it would be for an artifact, even though no, Buzzy Nest is still basically the best summon artifact, so it's still pretty solid. Just didn't make it into the list because it's still a summon artifact. But yeah, this also does work very well in tandem with enchants like Acrobat, so you can roll more often, or multi-roll so that you can create all those bees at once, and especially if you're using Beast Burst. Even if you don't need to use any potions, using them while the bees are all spread out during like an ambush or if mobs are all over, that will just basically destroy all of them. Works best on any armor, though I would rather use it on, say, Beehive armor, because you already get bees for getting hit. You could just summon so many bees for days, especially on trials that have 3 times the amount. Unfortunately, with Tumblebee and the armor effect itself and Busy Bee, you will get 3 bees at once and it'll cap there, but your Buzzy Nest will let you have 9 bees per nest, so that's a lot of bees. I think it was something like, what, 36 bees? You'll probably never get those all out at once, but if you do, oh man, that would be glorious. Speaking of Beast Burst though, I have it here for that reason. When you use a health potion, this enchant creates an explosion where any of your summons are, or your armor pets are, because the bat pet from your cave crawler or mystery armor, that does also explode too. It won't kill your pet, don't worry. Pt1, don't worry. Nope, no pets are harmed in the use of this enchant. But yeah, they deal hefty damage wherever those explosions are. Summon builds aren't particularly great, but this enchant can be used with, like I said, Beehive Armor, Bee Stinger, Buzzy Nest, or just the Tumblebee enchantments themselves. Like, you don't need to use all of them together to want to use Beast Surge, or Beast Burst. So these are all solid options to use with this enchant, minus the Buzzy Nest, which, yeah, they can be used on any dedicated summon build. But again, you don't need to use it for a summon build. Just the fact, though, that it's so good with a bee build and that you don't need to use it with a summon build is why I have this listed here. And like I said, it works best with Beehive Armor, and especially Beehive Armor. I think I meant to say all armors, but especially Beehive Armor, but you really want it mainly on Beehive Armor. Next then, I did mention that Beast Burst is the only really good pet enchant, but if you want to run a summon build, I figured I would include this, Beast Surge. This enchantment increases all summon and or armor pet attack and movement speed by 150%, essentially meaning that their DPS increases by that much too. And while pet builds are not particularly good, even on trials that give you 3 times the pet count, aside from, you know, if you're using bees, and while increasing bee attack speed doesn't help since each bee disappears after 3 attacks anyway, this enchant is undoubtedly better for other summon builds than beast bosses, because that only increases your summon damage by 40%. So having 150% more attack speed just comes out to more damage total. It's still not a hyper recommended enchantment, I would say, but if you want to run a summon build that's not bees, then you want this enchantment, along with, say, Beast Burst. Just don't bother with Beast Boss, it is not worth it even on a summon build. And yeah, works best for any armor, especially the ones that have health potions that heal nearby allies, because that will heal your pets as well. And then finally, at least for now, we have Luck of the Sea. This enchantment increases your odds of any gear drop being unique by 30%. Not useful for combat, obviously, but very useful for farming. During ancient hunts, it was bugged to where rare drops, like say Thief Armor, would drop to be it would drop with a unique tag, but it would still actually be that rare item, so it wouldn't actually be unique, it would just say it's unique. So instead of getting Spider Armor, you would just get unique Thief Armor, which was not useful. But recently that bug was, quote, fixed, and now it causes gilded unique items to drop as non-gilded unique items, so yeah, Mojang didn't really fix or learn to playtest anything. I mean, I guess it means that, you know, you won't get any unique gilded rare stuff, because you're not going to be really getting any gilded stuff at all, it's going to just be unique. I'd rather have a gilded item than just a unique. But yeah, it does still work though, if you're not doing hunts, if you're just doing normal levels, or if you're running the shops, even if it's the normal village merchant, Luck of the Sea will work to make unique spawn more often, and it works really well for the Piglin merchant with no bugs. And in fact, a method that I used to use for farming for gilded stuff, even before Cloud Save was a thing, was I used my PlayStation 4's online storage to back up my save there after I would finish a hunt, and then I would run the Piglin shop over and over, restocking it to see if anything good dropped. And if nothing good dropped and the restock price got really high, I would just re-download my save to reset his restock price back to just 10 gold. And then try again, because each time you restock the shop, it does reset all the drops. And then if I did get something good, I would back that save up and then I'd run another hunt. But if you have PC version where you can make whatever you want, it's so much better, because the enchant RNG in this game now is such horse crap. But yeah, because of the way that this enchant works, it works on any armor, just best to put it on the most combat effective armor, since it is wasting a slot for luck instead of combat, so you want to make sure you have as much combat effectiveness and safety as you can. So basically any of the top armors, and you will see what those armors are up ahead. I have them listed by, at least at first, by how good they are overall for combat and stuff, but I include a lot of armors that do different things that are all really useful. So, speaking of those armors, let's take a quick look at those, shall we? Well, okay, I say quick, and I hope it will be, but it's probably going to take me another 20 minutes or so to get through all these, but I will try. It's just, I knew when I was going into this that it was going to be a long video, because there's just so much to talk about. Like, when you know all the more nuanced information and other things about the game, there's a lot of information to share, but I gave myself some time in between recordings just before to let my voice rest a little bit, because it was starting to get hoarse, and I also noticed that there were some mistakes in this that I had to fix, so I took care of all that. So without further ado, let's get into armors. So, if built properly, you can use any armor with any weapon, but naturally some armors will be able to do certain things better than others. This quick rundown will explain some of the more useful or fun armors and what they can do. This generally is going to be, at least at first, just like with other stuff, I started with the best of the best and was going down the line, but eventually I was just kind of then adding things kind of by tier category, but not really in a specific order. Just like with these top 3 entries here, it's not really in a specific order, but from a melee standpoint, this first armor here I would say would be the quintessential one, and that is Renegade Armor / Hungry Horror, which same armors, just reskins for the Halloween event. These give you plus 20% weapon damage boost aura, which affects both your melee and range damage, as well as the jungle poison from Vine Whip and Encrusted Anchor, 25% more melee attack speed, and 35% damage reduction, which, very nice. In general, that means basically 50% more HP, yeah, but even though, like I had said before, 35% damage reduction doesn't stack with other damage reduction perfectly, it drops to 20% or so. However, still, in terms of offense and defense with most weapons, not all but most, these armors provide the most balance. Notably, the weapon damage boost and attack speed buffs are additive. So they do not like multiply your total like attack speed by 25% per se. If you have a mushroom, you're operating at 200% attack speed, and this armor will bump it up to 225%, not 250, which would be an actual 25% increase. So yeah, they do not multiply the full total by 20% or 25%. Still, these armors are very solid and in the top of the top, best being run for pure melee builds. Also, on top of that, that weapon damage boost aura and any effect on armors that say it's an aura, that will affect your teammates and your summons as well, which includes like your pets from, say, like Cave Crawler, the little bat. Those all get a 20% boost from this armor as long as they're close enough. And for this, the enchantment combos are pretty straightforward. For pure melee, you would want to run Potion Barrier, Cooldown, and then I would generally run either or between Chilling and Deflect, and then any one of Cowardice, another cooldown, or Snowball. I like to pair Chilling or Deflect with Cowardice because they can help to maintain that 100% HP for the buff. That's why I won't really pair Cowardice alone just with cooldown or stuff. It gets more support from Chilling and Deflect. Then if you're running, say, Thundering on your melee, which would be like if you're running daggers or sickles or coral blades or rapiers, you would want to use Renegade Armor or Hungry Horror. For that, you would want to use Potion Barrier, Cooldown, Cowardice, and Lightning Focus. The reason why is because if you just run Lightning Focus by itself, you will still overall usually get more damage from the Cowardice boost, so it makes more sense to run Cowardice 2 for the biggest damage boost if you want to do this to go for damage. Because that's its big, what you would say, niche, I guess. You could go for extra damage. Otherwise, if you want to run like Chilling or Deflect or other stuff, you may as well just kind of run the build up above and then just kind of use Thundering with it for fun. And then the other build would be for if you're using specifically Vine Whip or Encrusted Anchor, which is the same as the Thundering build, except you replace Lightning Focus with Poison Focus. Very powerful. It's a very solid armor, unless you're using Fighter's Bindings, because, well, actually, let me talk about it here. Next armor here would be Full Metal Armor. In terms of pure tank and raw offense, this armor has no equal. It sports plus 30% melee damage, which does also affect Jungle Poison from the Vine Whip and Anchor, 35% damage reduction, again, very solid, and it has a 30% chance to negate hits on top of that, making it even tankier. The downside being that your roll cooldown takes twice as long, which, for most melee builds, you won't be rolling a whole lot anyway, but if you do like to roll, then this armor wouldn't really be for you. Yeah, what it lacks in attack speed, like, say, from Renegade Armor Hungry Horror, which ultimately adds to it giving less DPS with most weapons, it more than makes up for being defensive, and also since Fighter's Bindings have the same attack speed when you're using a mushroom no matter what your armor is, because if your attack speed is plus 100% between that or 50% more, your Fighter's Bindings have the same hits per second. It's still 15.1. You have to go higher than 150%. So Renegade Armor with a mushroom is 125% more speed, and that will not change the punches. So Full Metal Armor actually takes more advantage of using Fighter's Bindings than what Renegade Armor does. The reason why you will often see me running Fighter's Bindings with Renegade Armor, though, is because that weapon damage boost aura on Renegade affects my Imploding Crossbow as well, whereas with Full Metal Armor it only affects your melee. So I kind of like it for my Imploding Crossbow damage too. Very, very nice. But yeah, like I said, same attack speed no matter what armor you're using with a mushroom, so this armor works better for them. Now, like I said, you don't get the ranged damage buff, and also this 30% melee damage does not affect your teammates, so it's only for you. And also this armor looks a little bit silly, kind of like maybe a kid riding their bike for the first time with a mom that's way overprotective and makes them wear pots and pans and stuff to protect themselves. It looks silly, doesn't look as cool, but it's very powerful. And again, just like Renegade Armor, I have it running these same enchantments depending on your weapon. Mainly be for, like, say, Fighter's Bindings type builds, but if you want to use an Anchor or a Whip, even though they won't, the armor won't let you swing as fast for the raw weapon DPS, the poison damage per second will go up because of that extra melee damage. So if you just hit the enemy once and let the damage tick up from the poison, since poison damage doesn't increase in speed with your attack speed, this actually does give you more one-shotting capabilities with poison. And then the last of the big three for the top armors would be Wither Armor. In terms of melee, this armor is one of the top 3 in the game, and it's not even made for melee. While soul builds are less popular, this is also the top soul armor to use as well. It gives you 6% lifesteal aura, meaning that you and all summons or teammates recover 6% of most damage that you deal. This does not include, though, damage that you deal with shockwave, swirling, burning, fire aspect, thundering, etc. Just anything that's not direct, so it needs to be weapon damage itself, either from melee or ranged, or a lot of artifact damage, which makes it really good for souls. So it's almost like having a built-in 6% leeching on most every hit that you land. Really good though for, like I said, if you're using a soul build with Corrupted Pumpkin or Corrupted Beacon, you will get healing for each tick of damage that you do to the enemy. And I did look this up because I was questioning it before, but yeah, Bag of Souls does not make your other soul artifacts take twice as many souls. In fact, for some reason, when I have Bag of Souls active, it's saying that I'm losing 1 soul each tick with my Corrupted Beacon or Pumpkin, whereas if I'm not using Bag of Souls, then it says -2, which I guess is them kind of saying that it's using it twice as fast, though it could have just been -1 and ticking down slower because I have more souls, but yeah, it does last twice as long, so I took care of that. But yeah, this armor, just by itself, it's like having leeching built in on every hit that you land, especially for your artifacts for using a soul build, and it also gives 35% damage reduction and 50% more souls gathered. And while that last buff is useless for melee, the first 2 buffs are more than enough to give this armor a top slot, giving you either extra healing or allowing you to go without leeching on your weapon. That's pretty big, because it frees you up for either another enchantment or just extra healing. And the enchantment combos would be same with the melee that I was showing above, same setups exactly, depending on what you want to run if you just want the lifesteal. For souls, though, the best build that I found for it is Soul Focus for more damage, a Bag of Souls for more soul gathering, and just more soul capacity to spam it when you're at a full meter, because I can often be sitting at a full meter for a long time, not needing to really use all those souls, so having almost double the size of a meter, very nice and helpful, as long as you're not running Shadow Shifter. Snowball as well. If you look at any of my past videos where I was using a soul build, Snowball helps so much, especially early game when in the beginning of a level you don't have any artifacts to use, like I may have said before, and you have to fight with your melee or ranged weapon, which is not built for heavy melee or ranged combat. It's very nice to have Snowball to stun lock enemies and let you farm for souls. And then finally you want Lightning Focus for the Lightning Rod. Or for a Shadow Soul build, you could run, this is Shadow Surge. Like I said, it will give you extra kill or souls for every kill that you get while in shadow form, although this does not, again, like I may have mentioned before, it doesn't count for artifact kills. Well, soul artifact kills don't give you souls, so you would have to land those kills with melee. But considering that you do, at base, 8 times more damage when you're in shadow form with your melee attack, you can kill a lot of mobs with this and get a ton of souls back. And you can also use your artifacts, like your Beacon or your Harvester, for free while you're in shadow form, because the mobs won't attack you. So you can soften them up first and then finish them off. Again though, Soul Focus for more damage, Snowball always a staple, and then since Bag of Souls does not work well with Shadow Shifter because Shadow Shifter takes 33% of your max souls, so it just increases how much it costs. You can either use Shadow Blast, which when you're exiting Shadow form, it does an extra, it's a little over 700,000 damage, which, like, 700k isn't a whole lot, but it's still better than the rolling explosion damage from Unstable Robes. Or for more soul gathering, you can just use Soul Speed, which is not too bad. Or you could throw Potion Barrier if you want, but you really won't need it too much with the soul build. But anyway, that covers it for the top 3 armors. These ones I would still consider meta. I do have a tier list which has like SS tier, S tier A, all the way down to PU, and just... I think I might have had like a joke tier for like a really bad piece of armor, but I cannot remember. However, these armors here, I don't think I would stick them in S tier. They are definitely about SS tier worthy. They're just not... It's like some people mistake what I say when I say things like Spider Armor, Stalwart, and Highland aren't top tier. It doesn't mean that I think they're bad. They're just not quite up there with these because these have extra qualities where these ones aren't as sought after, but they're still really good. They're really solid. They're up in the meta. They're up in that meta realm where they're good enough to be there. They're just not... They would be like in a tier between S and SS, and I still consider S to be meta anyway. But these would include Highland Armor for one. This is the little cousin of Full Metal Armor. It sports the same 35% damage reduction, very good, and 30% more melee damage, but instead of having the 30% hit negation that makes Full Metal Armor more tanky, and the increased roll cooldown making it kind of more sluggish, this one trades that to give you level 1 Swift-Footed instead. So this makes it a lot more nimble, and it looks a lot cooler too. And it can also use Fighter's Bindings just the same because it doesn't bother with attack speed and it has that 30% more melee damage. So it's a lot cooler of an armor to use if you want to use it with Fighter's Bindings, which is why I run these same 2 top setups here for my Fighter's Bindings. I don't like to use Full Metal Armor as much anymore. I know it's better, I know it will keep me alive more, but I don't really need it, and this looks so much cooler. I mean, it's very solid. Even, like I said, for Anchor and Whip and other things that don't benefit from a lower attack speed cap, like Fighter's Bindings don't care about it, but still, more damage in a single hit, especially for poison damage, that's not bad. And next we have Stalwart Armor. Whereas Highland Armor was the little cousin of Full Metal Armor, this is more like the little brother. Just like Full Metal Armor, it has 35% damage reduction, it has a 30% chance to negate hits, and it has a 100% longer roll cooldown. The difference is that instead of having 30% more melee damage, it instead has level 1 Potion Barrier built into it. Now this does mean that you can't enchant Potion Barrier onto it yourself, and you're stuck with it at level 1, which is only 5 seconds long instead of 9 seconds, but still, this does let you run a lot more tanky setups on top of all that, just to make yourself truly unkillable. And it really does live up to this name. There are a lot of things that you can run with it. As you see here, it's a lot like the Full Metal Armor. I just replaced that first slot that would have been for Potion Barrier with either Chilling or another cooldown, since you can't have Potion Barrier with it. And just like with Full Metal Armor, I didn't mention this, but since it already has 30% hit negation, it does pair really well with Deflect for maintaining Cowardice, because against ranged mobs especially, that is both a separate 30% chance and then a 45% chance on top of that to negate all of those hits. And I could show you the way that I calculate that really quickly, actually. So you would just take 100% chance of you getting hit by anything, take away 30%, so that's for the 30% hit negation, and then from that, you would take away 45% more. So, on average then, that is 61.5% chance to not get hurt by any ranged attacks. Again, that's an average. That doesn't mean, like, full stop, it's going to be 61.5% less hits taken from those, but makes you really tanky if you want to run with Cowardice on that. However, the one that I run is this one for pure tank. It is Chilling to reduce the enemy's attack speed, Deflect against ranged enemies, Snowball against just any enemies in general, and then cooldown. Pairing this with a Cursed Axe that has both Guarding Strike and Weakening on it, the damage that I take from enemies looks like I'm a boss getting hit by a base rapier with no extra damage and chance. It is that insane. But yeah, this is also a very solid armor, even though it only has level 1 Potion Barrier. Even if you're not making a Potion Barrier build with Refreshment, it's very fun, and it looks so much cooler than Full Metal Armor as well. I've changed around a lot, because I overlooked this for so long, but it looks like an Executioner, and I love that. Now we have Spider Armor. A lot of people love this armor, and there's a good reason why. It's sort of like Wither Armor's little brother. It's often found in the same levels too. You get both of them on Desert Temple and Soul Sand Valley. So Spider Armor is unique in that it's the only unique armor that only has 2 buffs, which kind of holds it back a little. That's why I don't put it in the top SS tier, it's more in the sub SS tier. And that's because even though it only has 2 buffs, those buffs are incredible, and it puts it on the higher scale of like most armors. For one thing, it gives you the same 6% lifesteal aura that Wither Armor gives. On top of that, though, it also gives you 25% more attack speed. This makes it less tanky than Wither Armor, but it does make it more offensive. However, like I said before with how attack speed and damage reduction stacks, if you're using an Ironhide Amulet on both Wither Armor and Spider Armor, and you're also using a Deathcap Mushroom, that comes out to the Spider Armor having 11.5% more DPS, and then Wither Armor has 20% more 20% more damage resistant. So in terms of raw numbers, Wither Armor still comes out on top when you're comparing the two, but it is still a very solid armor, both for damage and for healing. And no surprise, it's running the same enchants as the other armors that I mentioned for melee. Just it's a big rule of thumb, and I'll mention that a little bit later. And this, however, armor right here is a little bit different. And that's because while it can use melee fairly well with its 30% more melee damage buff, Splendid Robe is more made for using certain artifacts with its minus 40% artifact cooldown and the 50% more artifact damage buffs. It makes it really superb for running, say, Satchel of Elements, among a lot of other things, but those primarily. The damage and cooldown that it offers for it is that incredible for just spamming them constantly. And the 2 combos that you would want to use for the satchels would be, if you're just doing satchel melee, where you're like focusing melee, but you're also using satchel as like a third artifact, you can run Potion Barrier and cooldown, along with Ironhide Amulet and Deathcap Mushroom. Then 1 satchel with fire and lightning focus. But if you want to use pure satchels, you could use cooldown for extra cooldown, fire focus, lightning focus for the damage, and then for support you can either use Snowball to hold off enemies if they're advancing on you, Potion Barrier if you want that in a pinch, another cooldown so you can spam them more, or like I talked about before, you can use Shadow Surge for that Shadow Mage build that I posted like 2 videos ago. Super good. It's so broken, hopefully they don't fix it. And these next 2 armors here, they are very similar for combat with Splendid Robe, but they have different uses that they do better with. First one here being Verdant Robe. Similar to Splendid Robe, this armor is focused on artifact use, but not as much for combat. With 15% move speed aura, which affects both summons and your teammates, 40% more artifact cooldown, and built-in level 1 Bag of Souls, which doesn't really do anything for it in most cases, it works really well for speedy builds, even ones that utilize Torment Quiver. That's where the Bag of Souls comes in handy for. For pure speed, you would want to pair it with soul ranged weapon like mainly Bow of Lost Souls, because then you can run Anima Conduit for healing, Cooldown Shot, which helps with, say, if you're using a Ghost Cloak, if you pair it with Burst Bowstring, because those shots count as charge shots. And on top of that, you can use Tempo Theft, so when you roll near enemies, you hit them, you steal their speed, get a speed boost, you can recharge your Ghost Cloak, use your Boots of Swiftness and Deathcap Mushroom, and just zoom right past enemies. But this armor can be used for both melee and artifact combat too, just not as well as Splendid Robe can. The enchantment combos you would run are, for pure speed I haven't seen this run, and I haven't tried it myself, but I do have one like this because I thought it would be fun. You have cooldown to help you with using Boots of Swiftness. Speed synergy, because both Boots of Swiftness and Ghost Cloak trigger very often, so you will constantly have that speed boost from it. Then you got Swift-Footed, which you can use in conjunction with Cooldown Shot, Burst Bowstring, and Tempo Theft while rolling to get an even bigger speed boost. And then you got Rush, so you can actually use real speedrun strat damage boost. Just take a hit and zoom right past everything. I think it would be really fun. Like I'd said before with the Ghost Cloak, you could run 2 of them because they work really weird with cooldown. But if you have Cooldown Shot in conjunction with Ghost Cloak, then that will help recharge it the rest of the way. However, for melee, you could also run, just say like Potion Barrier, Snowball for more defense, Deflect and Chilling for more defense to pair with Cowardice, or you can run cooldown for even more cooldown, which always solid because it already has cooldown on it, so you can have just 1 cooldown on it to help your, say, Gong of Weakening recharge even faster than 7.7 seconds, which Always nice, Gong is a superb artifact. If you want to use pure artifact combat, then you would want to run something more like, well, not pure artifact, but if you're using melee and artifacts, you can use Potion Barrier and Cooldown just for your Amulet and Deathcap Mushroom, and then either another cooldown, actually, yeah, that is the option I put there, just so you can use a Satchel more often, and then one of these 3 defensive enchants here. And then just like with Splendid Robe, if you want to use Satchels, you could use Cooldown, Fire, Lightning Focus, and then the same enchants. The only downside is that the built-in Bag of Souls means you have 33% more max souls, so that Shadow Shifter will cost 33% more souls than it would normally. So instead of taking 99 souls, it would be about 132. Still not the biggest deal because you can refill that really fast with just the normal soul gathering on top of Shadow Surge, but still Splendid Robe does do that better. However, then we have the other armor here, Ember Robe, and this is Verdant Robe's brother. This robe is it's very similar. It's the same in almost every way. The only differences are, well, for one, it being red, and if you look at it, it's much more upkept. This is a little more tattered, but it makes it look more edgy, I think. Another difference, though, is that it has level 1 burning built in instead of the Bag of Souls. Verdant Robe is favored for speedrunning because it's less conspicuous due to not having the built-in burning, because if you're, say if you have Shadow Brew active and you're trying to sneak past enemies, if you hurt them with burning, there's a chance they could chase you, and it's not always ideal when you're trying to speedrun and speed past enemies. But it still can do the exact same things as Verdant Robe. And if you're wanting to use one of the 2 for combat, Ember is better because it does have slightly extra damage, and if you want to use it for Shadow Soul build, you don't have that extra 33% souls, making Shadow Shifter take more from your soul meter. For speedrunning purposes, though, Verdant Robe is still slightly better, but since Bag of Souls doesn't often come into play with it, you could also just use an Evocation Robe. Anyway, though, aside from that, though, the enchant combos will be the exact same as Verdant Robe, depending on what you want to run it with. I mean, you could also maybe throw Fire Focus on something else here, but since you already have a Fire Focus build for the burning, which doesn't add a whole lot anyway, that pretty much has it covered. Now, this next armor here, Mystery Armor, it is a unique armor that can ironically only ever be rare at best. I know that's a really bad joke, but it's true. It does not have a unique version, even though it is a unique armor in itself. This is your go-to armor if you want to suffer RNG hell and just pull your hair out. It's like it can randomly have any 2 buffs that all armors have, with the possible inclusion of 1 negative buff too, that being 10% less movement speed, 100% longer roll cooldown, or making enemies target you more, which, if you're playing multiplayer and you want to play support for someone less experienced, that's actually kind of a positive buff too. But it's still classified as a negative buff. You can never have 3 positives on this, and I don't know why they don't have a... I know that it would be even more RNG hell, but if they had a unique version of this that had 3 positive random buffs, that would be really cool too. But yeah, that only exists with modding / hacking, which yeah, I do have one like that. Really nice, but I don't use it too much because it feels dirty. But yeah, it may only be able to have just 2 buffs, just like Spider Armor, but this does allow you to run some combinations that do not exist on any pre-existing armor already, such as, say, you can have 6% Lifesteal Aura and 30% more melee damage, or you can have 20% more weapon damage boost aura and 30% more melee damage for, like, Fighter's Bindings, per se, or you can run 25% more attack speed and 30% melee damage. There's a lot of stuff, but since it's more unique, useful combos involve melee, at least to my limited experience with it, its more useful enchantment combos are pretty much more or less the same as Renegade Armor. I think it's actually the exact same. Someone did mention, though, a use for it with the Troubadour's effect of making positive buffs last 30% longer, combined with 40% less potion cooldown, so you can abuse Potion Barrier with it and Surprise Gift. And that's actually a pretty solid use for it. I'm trying to remember who had said that in the Discord server. I think it might have been... I think they were Colin, as someone that I talk to a lot too. Yeah, like I said, I don't experiment too much with Mystery Armor, but there's a lot of combinations that you can use that are not just melee. So, you know, just get creative with it. See what synergizes well that doesn't already exist on armor, or maybe in better forms on other armors. Speaking of armors that use Potion Barrier and Surprise Gift really well, Hero's Armor is the king of that. This armor is a bit less straightforward, but very useful in its defensive utility. It gives you 35% damage reduction, makes mobs target you more, Your health potions heal nearby allies, and you have 40% less health potion cooldown. And for multiplayer, those last 3 buffs add great support to your friends. And the last 2 buffs are really good for summons in general. Because, you know, you're making enemies target you more, so you're protecting your friends, your health potions are healing them too. And having less health potion cooldown means you can heal them and summons a lot more. So, yeah, very solid armor just for that. But, like I had said, the armor's real strength is abusing Potion Barrier with a weapon that has refreshment on it. Because your health potions only take 27 seconds to recharge, and it's really easy to keep your Potion Barrier active constantly because of that. What this armor lacks in raw DPS, it makes up for in its utility, especially when used with other health potion enchants, like, say, Surprise Gift. If you had seen all my previous videos, I did do 2 runs of Creepy Crypt with this, once with a Refreshment Hawkbrand and the other one with a Whirlwind that has it, and it destroyed. Like, there was very little, there were very few moments where I didn't have Potion Barrier active or that I couldn't have had it active. It is just super fun to use for that constant Shadow Brew or Strength Potion damage buff. Really fun. And the enchantment combos for this would be, the one that I use for health potion abuse that I used in those videos were Potion Barrier, Cooldown, Surprise Gift, and Chilling. You can also run Cowardice if you want, but I preferred Chilling just for more defense and because I was going to have Strength Potion active a lot anyway. And since it does have the potion cooldown, you could use it for bee potion abuse by having, again, Potion Barrier, cooldown, but then you have Tumblebee so you can summon more bees, and then Beast Burst. However, this is not the best armor that could use that kind of setup. The best one is actually the next one, and I think I listed it here because it made me think of it. And that is Beehive Armor. Like I said, speaking of bees, this armor makes great use of them, whether intentional or not. It sports the same 35% damage reduction that all the top armors have. If any armor has that just by itself, it's not a bad armor. Just like Hero's Armor, it also has health potions healing nearby allies, and it has a 30% chance to summon a bee whenever you're hit, though it does cap at 3 at a time. If you combine this with Bee Stinger, a Buzzy Nest or 2, and Tumblebee, you can have a potential of 15 bees out at a time. If you have 3, then you can have 18, but that's kind of overkill. And like I said before, if you have a trial that multiplies your pet count by 3, you could have like 27 or 36 bees, which is just crazy. And I ran this in a Soggy Cave video with my Bee Stinger, and even without having Guarding Strike or Gong of Weakening or Ironhide Amulet, you can make really good use of this setup to still fight really comfortably because the distraction that the bees provide is just that good. And the enchantment combos that you can run are, you can still run, I guess, like I'd mentioned a lot, pure melee, just Potion Barrier, cooldown, Chilling or Deflect, and then Cowardice cooldown or Snowball. You can run that very well just with the added bee support when you get hit. Or, if you want to just focus on bee melee, which I used in that video, I had Potion Barrier, cooldown, Tumblebee, and Beast Burst. But you could also try Acrobat or Multi-Roll for the extra rolling for Tumblebee. I just really like Beast Burst because when I got a lot of bees spread out and then they're mixed along all the enemies, just use a potion whether or not I need it, and all those enemies are basically dead. It's really funny to hear a unique item drop off screen when you do that too. You're like, oh, something died. But yeah, very solid, very fun, even if it does kind of look like you're wearing like a sweaty, sticky, gluey cardboard box. Yeah, look at yourself next time you're wearing it. It does look like a silly like Halloween costume, but it's so fun. And then for a slightly less useful, but still a pretty good and nuanced armor, we've got Golden Piglin Armor. It's a unique armor from the Nether that focuses on health potion use. It offers 50% more artifact damage, resets your artifact cooldown every time you use a health potion, and it has built-in level 1 Surprise Gift. Now, this isn't the most synergistic since the more potent artifacts that you would benefit from having more artifact damage, they already have kind of low cooldown. But it's still fun to use for general combat, especially if you're using a refreshment weapon for a Potion Barrier abuse build. Downside being, though, that level 1 Surprise Gift means you have a 50% chance of getting something to appear, or like an item to spawn when you use a potion, which means you will never get 2 items, and you only have a 1 in 2 chance of getting anything to appear. But yeah, for pure general combat, just like with other stuff, you know, Potion Barrier, cooldown, the same. Now if you want to use Satchel Melee, you could just do Potion Barrier, cooldown, and the 2 focus enchantments. Again, this doesn't really focus on really utilizing that potion resetting your artifact cooldown because you're not really gonna get the most use out of that unless you are using a refreshment weapon, which you can do, but you might not see the biggest, like every time you use it, your artifacts might already be cooled down because they already have, you know, Satchel of Elements already has only 10-second cooldown, but still is very solid because of the synergy that you can use with Potion Barrier and Refreshment. And speaking of Nether Armor that has fairly good synergy but isn't really the best, we have Living Vines Armor. I said another of the Nether unique armors. Personally, I believe it is the coolest looking armor, and I still stand by that now. And yeah, I will admit, it's not the best of the best armors, but it is really fun to use. It makes your health potions heal nearby allies, which I forgot that it had because I'm always playing like single player when using this armor, and I don't use summons, but it does have that there for support. On top of that, though, the other abilities that it makes the most use out of is when you roll, you trap and poison nearby enemies, and you also have built-in level 1 Acrobat to make your rolls recharge faster for that synergy. And it works really good for semi-roll builds, because I don't really like pure rolling builds. It's just, it feels weird to me, and I just don't like focusing on that. It's a lot to manage, but with just semi-rolling, it works really well. You can even check out either of my 2 Living Weaponry videos, whether I'm running it in Arkhaven with this build or running it in an Ancient Hunt. I have Living Vines Armor with my Stunning, Exploding, Gravity, Radiance, Bee Stinger. I have Blast Fungus, Ironhide Amulet, Deathcap Mushroom, and my Imploding Crossbow, just because everything is geared towards causing explosions, and it's so fun. Because when enemies group up around you, you can roll away while throwing fungus, so they get stuck in place by the vines that you create, and then they get pelted with that. Aside from the fungus not doing a ton of damage and them spreading around and missing a lot, it's still really fun. And actually I mentioned it right here too. Combined with Blast Fungus, Ironhide Amulet, Deathcap Mushroom. You can do a semi-melee build where you roll now and then to use Blast Fungus. Again, Gong of Weakening would be better, but it's just really fun. And the enchantment combos that I run on my 2 Living Vines armors are Potion Barrier in case I need it, cooldown for Ironhide Amulet, Deathcap Mushroom, and even the Fungus. Swift-footed, definitely, so every time I roll I get a speed boost, so I'm not really feeling like I'm missing out. And then one of them has Chilling to just slow enemies down in general, and the other has Snowball in case I need to stun lock anything. Though to be honest, I've only really used my Chilling one. The Snowball one, I think it'll be useful still, it just doesn't appeal to me as much, but I have it there just as an option. And then next we have one of the Ocean DLC armors, the Nimble Turtle Armor. This one focuses more on life preservation than it does offense, because it has 35% damage reduction. It gives you a 25% healing boost aura. It doesn't call it an aura, but it does behave like one, because if you're playing with someone that has this armor, you will see a little kind of radiance almost looking icon appear, and it says like healing boost or something like that. And so that means that any healing that you get from any effects, it goes up by 25%. Really nice. And it has level 1 rush built in, I guess, for quick escapes to keep yourself alive. Not the most useful, but you notice when it happens. Just, you don't really get to make active use of it, I would say. But in many ways, it does function somewhat like Spider Armor or Wither Armor because, well, it trades the inherent lifesteal that you get from just your damage in general, and it replaces that with more HP recovered from enchants like Leeching, Radiance, Anima Conduit, or if you're using artifacts like Soul Healer or Totem Regeneration. So you do have to have those healing effects on, but you get more extra healing for it. So that is the trade-off for it compared to, say, Wither Armor or Spider Armor. But speaking of that, in multiplayer, you can combine both this 25% healing boost aura and 6% lifesteal aura from a friend, so that you both have just insane healing. So you'll be getting that 6% lifesteal, but also 25% more healing from it on top of that. And yeah, it does still function like melee. There's not a whole lot you can do to capitalize on the healing that's worth it. So basically same as Renegade Armor, Highland Armor, Full Metal Armor, etc. Though, in contrast, Archer's Armor here, it works much differently than most other armors that I've mentioned. And that's why this armor gets a high rank. It's because it's the only pure range-based niche armor of its kind. It gives you 15% more move speed aura, which is almost the same as mushroom speed to help you get away from enemies. You get 30% more range damage, so it's focusing more on staying away from enemies and hitting them from afar. And you also get 10 more arrows for every bundle that you pick up. So this allows you for the potential to run an insane strategy that I like to use that involves a harp crossbow with multi-shot, chain reaction, infinity, and gravity. and use it with 3 fireworks arrows, and you just obliterate every mob in your that's in your way in a level without them even coming close enough for you to have to try to melee them to death. It's just insane. And for these builds, you don't even need to run Potion Barrier. Like, it's an option if you want to, but since enemies aren't really going to even get close enough to hit you, you won't really need it. But yeah, for general ranged, you could do Potion Barrier or Snowball if you just want to hold off one advancing enemy that gets close enough to you. Cowardice for that extra range damage, and then 2 cooldowns for whatever quivers or arrow artifacts that you want to use. But for my Harp Fireworks Abuse build, I use Cowardice, Chilling, and 2 cooldown. I originally had 3, but I realized that, like I said before, if you have a fireworks arrow primed and you fire it and infinity triggers, not only will you keep your fireworks arrow primed because it'll be as if you never used it, it actually causes whichever artifact you had used to start cooling down. So you can have it cooling down while still being able to use it, so it's almost, in a way, it acts kind of like a cooldown by itself, and it can actually work even better. Then I have Cowardice, again, for more damage, and Chilling is so that, like, say, if I'm being chased by, there's a few things, but mainly, like a Vindicator Raid Captain, Chilling will slow him down just enough that I can actually gain distance from him, enough that I actually have time to turn around and shoot him and then start moving again, because otherwise, if you're playing a trial and you don't have any speed, they take a while to kill, and they hit you really hard, so you have to have some way to outrun them. Otherwise, yeah, this can take out anything. You can go through levels without taking a single hit. You know, provided that it's enough space for you to shoot enemies from a distance and not, like, really small rooms where you get, like, boxed in and ambushed, or if it's ranged enemies that are shooting back at you. But yeah, this does give you one of those potentials to do a hitless run. Not as cheesy as the Shadow Mage build, but still is fairly good at cheese. Next, though, for some more nuanced armor, you got Shadow Walker. This armor is another that focuses more on rolling. Gives you 35% damage reduction as well as both a 50% faster roll, and you also get brief invincibility while rolling. But this does not negate debuffs that you get when you get hit, so say if you roll through a poison shot, you won't take damage from the poison shot itself, but you will get poisoned, so you will still get hurt by that. So, I don't know if that was intentional or if they just overlooked that, because they like to overlook a lot of stuff. Yeah, this can be abused for pure rolling builds, but I get the most fun out of running a fairly standard melee build that has some modifications that make it use the armor's invincible rolls. Kind of plays like Dark Souls, and I did actually have a short video showcasing this. My Shadow Armor, or Shadow Walker, is Potion Barrier, cooldown. Then you got Acrobat, so you got Acrobat here, so you have faster roll cooldown to use those rolls more often. And multi-roll in case you might need to roll a few times if you mistime it, but it's so satisfying to time a roll to, like, dodge, say, a Creeper Explosion or a Geomancer Pillar Explosion. It's the only actual solid way to dodge those if you get boxed in. Otherwise, yeah, you could do a pure rolling build, but I just don't find those very attractive. Just very annoying. It's annoying to watch them, too. But like I said, semi-rolling, I love it. And for that, there's also Glow Squid Armor. Originally, it was an overlooked armor for how unuseful it was, at least at first. It recently underwent a bit of a buff. So it does give you 50% more move speed aura to help, like, evade enemies. You do get brief invulnerability while rolling, which I think I've mentioned it before, but I overlooked the fact that it had that ability. I was just thinking about the ink. What that does is when you roll, you release a blinding ink cloud wherever you rolled from. And these ink clouds are fairly large, and if a mob steps into it or even just kind of near it, they're blinded for a short time and are likely to miss most of their attacks, just like if, say, an illusioner casts their bullcrap blinding on you. Before, these ink clouds were really small, and enemies were only blinded if they stayed in the ink. But part of this buff is, I've noticed, yeah, they stay blinded even after they step out of it, so it's really good. But it's not only great defensively, both offline and in multiplayer, because you can help your partners as well by just creating a blinding perimeter. Mobs that are blinded by this, like I'd said before, they are affected by ambush, so they take more bonus damage. The enchantment combos that you'd want to run are, what I have for mine is melee focus. I have Potion Barrier, cooldown. I went with Chilling instead of Cowardice, though sometimes the slowdown is annoying. Then I have multi-roll, just so I can, like, roll around a lot and create little perimeters and, like, ambush spots. So I have a lot of ink patches so that enemies are sure to cross through it. But if you do want to do roll focus, you could do potion barrier, cooldown, multi-roll, and then either swift-footed if you want to gain speed after those rolls, or acrobat so you can use them more often and have that speed reduced, like that little speed reduction you get when it's cooling down, not last as long. Either way though, very fun armor. I used to hate it, but I actually like running it quite a lot now. And next we have Soul Dancer Robe. This is a lot further down than Wither Armor, and like I said, yeah, Wither Armor is better. I don't think it's this much worse. It's just, like I said, as I went down the line, I was just kind of throwing in armors that either I was thinking of at the time or that I'd kind of forgotten and then threw in. So these aren't necessarily in exact order. I think they were in more order by tier. So these, I think, were in the same tier that I'd set. Or something like that. I think the order was a little bit wonky, though. But yeah, this armor is the brother of Wither Armor. Has the same 50% more souls gathered. The difference, though, is that instead of 6% lifesteal aura that you could get from, say, Corrupted Beacon or Harvester or stuff like that, and the 35% damage reduction, it instead has 50% more artifact damage, so you do more damage with those artifacts instead of healing yourself, and it has a 30% chance to negate hits. So this does make it inherently more offensive than Wither Armor, though overall it's a bit less effective because longevity and just keeping yourself alive is a lot more useful than going glass cannon and getting yourself killed at the cost of killing things a bit faster. Also, because, I mean, you could count the 30% chance to negate hits as kind of like 30% damage reduction in general, like overall, but when you do take a hit, you are going to take the full damage, so any hit that could one-shot you, if it gets through, you're getting one-shotted. But yeah, additionally, with Shadow Shifter, it can run Satchel of Elements pretty well too, and that gives it its little niche, which actually does bump it up a lot, because you can run it a lot the same as Splendid Robe. So yeah, for souls it's the same as Wither Armor, and the same with Shadow Souls, you run the same enchants. Though unlike Splendid Robe with the Shadow Mage build, where you would run cooldown, Lightning and Fire Focus, and Shadow Surge for more souls when you get kills, since this already has 50% more soul gathering on top of the weapons you'd use, you could actually run double cooldown and Fire Focus and Lightning Focus. However, this doesn't use it as well as Splendid Robe, because Splendid Robe, with its built-in cooldown, even just having one of these, it does come out to a bit more cooldown, and Shadow Surge is more souls you'll get. But it does give Soul Dancer Robe an extra use that actually sets it apart from Wither Armor just a tiny bit. And I mean, it looks much cooler than Splendid Robe, I gotta admit. And it's the same damage too, so you're not losing out too much there. Like, this is enough soul gathering to get you through. But finally, before I wear out my voice even more, we've got Titan's Shroud. And it is just like, well, not just like Wither Armor and Soul Dancer Robe or Unstable Robe, but it is a soul armor. But it's a bit different than Soul Dancer Robe, Wither Armor, and Unstable Robes. It kind of combines both Wither Armor and Renegade Armor with its buffs, except it doesn't have the Lifesteal Aura, nor does it have the extra attack speed, but it does have the 20% more weapon damage boost aura, 50% more souls gathered, and 35% damage reduction. So it makes it a very good combination for running a souls melee build, which means more or less you'll be using Moon Daggers or Soul Fists. Though you could run a melee version of Jailer's Scythe, Frost Scythe, Truth Seeker, or Eternal Knife. It's just these generally do perform better. But yeah, any of them is fine. It's best to run along with an Ironhide Amulet for defense and Deathcap Mushroom, since you are going to be going in close with melee. But instead of Gong of Weakening, you could run instead Harvester for the extra soul damage, especially since, like I said before, when you use a Harvester it does not interrupt your melee swings, so you can keep on attacking and doing your regular damage, but also add on that Harvester damage. Though for the ranged, you could go with the same Imploding Crossbow that I use all the time, but if you want more soul gathering, you could use a Void Collar or Feral Soul Crossbow with Anima Conduit and Soul Siphon just to give you extra healing as well as more soul gathering if you want to. And for that, the enchantment combo that you would want to use would be Soul Focus for the soul damage, cooldown obviously for Deathcap Mushroom and Ironhide Amulet, Potion Barrier for that, you know, last ditch, last resort survival tactic. And depending on if you want to focus more on souls, you could do Bag of Souls, or if you want to focus more on the melee side, you could do Cowardice. I mean, there are some more interesting armors like the Troubadour, which I forget if I'd mentioned it before, because like I said, there was a bit of a gap between the recordings for this. But you could run Deathcap Mushroom and Ironhide Amulet without cooldown on it at all, because it makes them last, at least it makes the amulet last long enough to to reuse it before it runs out. With the mushroom, it lets it last about 28 point something seconds, so it's almost the full 30 seconds. So very, very useful if I were to include that armor into this here. I did have a little section here that I could go over really quickly for build setup. This was sort of my little apology for people that really like ranged, because I didn't have a whole lot to say about ranged. I did also type this out before I even added all these armors and stuff, so, and also the enchants for it as well, so there may be some information that I repeated. Apologies for that, but yeah, let me just read this really quickly. And this is before getting into each weapon and their enchant combos, which I honestly might do for a separate video, which I'll release in the same day. It's just, this is already going to be long enough as it is, and I might want to make a separate video just for the weapon enchant combos themselves. But since I didn't mention every armor, like, again, Troubadour and so many others, and I did get some comments about that, a good general armor build for using any of these weapons for melee would be, first and foremost, Potion Barrier and Cooldown on any of your armor. And then any two out of Cooldown, you know, for more Gong cooldown, Cowardice for more damage, Chilling for more defense, Snowball for more defense, or Deflect for more defense. I would personally pair it Snowball and Chilling, Cooldown and Chilling, just for some more defense or cooldown and defense, Cowardice and Chilling just to help you maintain that full HP against melee enemies, or you could do Cowardice and Deflect to maintain your HP against ranged enemies. It just depends on the armor, though, like I'd mentioned above with the different armors, if you want to run something for other armors to make good use out of their unique traits, like I said, you could do Swift-Footed for Living Vines armor, you could use Multi-Roll for Squid armor, or Shadow Walker. I actually meant Glow Squid armor, but same thing. Acrobat for Shadow Walker. Then you could also use Tumblebee and or Beast Burst for Beehive armor. And you can also use Bag of Souls and Soul Focus for Titan Shroud. Also, again, Wither Armor and Soul Dancer, but I talk about Soul a little bit lower down. But yeah, generally for melee, the best artifacts that you would want to use would be Ironhide Amulet for 50% more damage reduction, because you're getting in close, you're going to be trading hits. Gong of Weakening for burst 25% damage reduction, as well as dealing 3 times damage to all affected mobs just to get rid of any threats really quick. And then you've got Deathcap Mushroom, just double your attack speed, and also 20% more movement speed. Very useful. And I think I didn't actually mention my Imploding Crossbow a whole lot until now. And that would be the most comfy ranged option that I've come up with for melee is my Imploding Crossbow that I have with Multi-Shot, Wild Rage, Infinity, and Tempo Theft for just damage and utility. Because for one thing, you can divide mob aggro and or you can make their enchants turn on each other, like make them hurt each other with Burning, zap each other with Electrified. You can make Fire Trail hurt each other or themselves. It also will cut off, if an enemy has heals allies, it will not heal other enemies, nor will it get healed by other enemies if it is affected by Wild Rage. And it can also make creepers explode on other enemies too, so if you shoot a creeper that's really far away or kind of far away, and it's near another enemy and it gets affected by this, you can consider that creeper dead, and possibly whatever it explodes on. Very useful. You also get a huge speed boost with Tempo Theft, and it helps slow down other things too. And for massive damage, you can go with Multi-Shot, because each shot of the Imploding Crossbow and Exploding Crossbows and Firebolt throwers in general have splash damage. That means that you not only don't have to land a shot directly on an enemy to do damage, but if you land one shot in a group of enemies, that one shot will affect pretty much all of the enemies in that group if they're close enough. So that one shot can be doing like 4 or more times the amount of damage that just one arrow would normally do. But if you trigger multi-shot on a group as well, that means that at least 3 to 4 of those shots is hitting every mob, so each mob is taking like 3 to 4 shots of damage. So if you trigger multi-shot once, twice, maybe 3 times on an enchanted mob group, you can consider that group obliterated. It's so good. Infinity is more for cushioning because the weapon has low ammo, but you can get away with not using it if you're good with managing your ammo. So you could have, say, looting on it for more support. You could have weakening. You could try critical hit. You could try committed. There's a lot of things, but I just personally prefer Infinity. Really great. Also, on the plus side, any shot from the Exploding Crossbow and its uniques, they ignore enemy deflect, so those shots will never come back at you, and any damage you do to an enemy with it does not give you return thorns damage, so you're completely immune to that if they just like to spam a group of thorns enemies that they want you to kill yourself on. It's just... I have a hard time putting down my imploding crossbow for anything else on a melee build. However, if you're running a soul build, the most optimal setup that I've come up with, like I'd mentioned on the armors again, soul focus, snowball, bag of souls, lightning focus. You can either use wither armor for artifact damage healing, or you can use soul dancer robe for 50% more artifact damage, or you can try unstable robes for something different, even if not as useful. And again, those builds use corrupted pumpkin or beacon, harvester, and lightning rod. And you could also try, like I'd mentioned, soul focus, snowball, shadow blast, or soul speed along with shadow surge for with the same armors. Only instead you would use corrupted pumpkin, corrupted beacon, harvester, and shadow shifter, since you wouldn't have the lightning focus. For ranged, if you're doing a soul build, you would want to use anima conduit, tempo theft, soul siphon, and wild rage on a void caller for great support, healing, soul gathering, needed speed, and enemy grouping for lightning rod. Originally, I really loved void caller because, especially on console, you can't pick the exact mob you want to target with lightning rod, like I'd said. And it does hit an area around the enemy that you strike, but it's not a wide area, so you can tag an enemy with lightning rod, and before it strikes down, you quick shoot them with void caller so that the built-in gravity pulls nearby mobs into it, and they all get zapped and just obliterated by the lightning. But in general, just gravity is really nice, just for holding enemies off while you're trying to pelt them with soul artifacts and stuff. For a little while, though, I liked Farrell's soul crossbow a little bit more because you had level 3 gravity, and it already had a soul enchantment built in. But since they added the ability to have soul siphon on ranged now, I much more prefer having anima conduit and soul siphon than I do anima conduit and enigma resonator, because you can get a lot more souls from that, whereas enigma resonator, not the most useful, but still, yeah, very, very solid. And also, you would want wild rage just for more support, and the speed that you get from tempo theft. I've tried running a soul build on Obsidian Pinnacle especially, and the redstone golems were so annoying to fight because you couldn't do a ton of damage. You would have to basically freely hit them while they're laying their mines. But they are fast enough where you have to start running away early before they stop setting their mines, because otherwise they will catch up to you, and that just took forever. So just adding tempo theft to give me a speed boost while slowing down the golems lets me just hammer them with, say, corrupted beacon for a longer time. And then as they're running at me, I just shoot them once and I can run away. Very nice. But now, if you modify that void collar to be looting instead of soul siphon, you can do really well with a melee or artifact combat build instead. It's really good for utility and support. Because any kills that you get with your melee weapon or even artifact damage will still trigger looting even if it's on your weapon, so you can use that for free shadow brews or strength potions, or if you want swiftness potion too. It's very nice. You could also use, like I'd mentioned before, a Bow of Lost Souls with Anima Conduit, Burst, Bowstring, Cooldown Shot, and Tempo Theft for speed, or Wild Rage if you just want some maybe artifact combat support range for, say, like your Verdant Robe or something. It's still very solid. Unfortunately, though, since I'm not really a ranged expert, and also because Mojang made enemy deflect so brokenly overpowered, these options, along with the harp crossbow that I mentioned for the archer's armor, are the most effective ranged weapons. It's really hard to recommend other ranged builds. So yeah, thanks Mojang for making ranged play a nightmare. Really appreciate that. Actually, no, there are two that I will run now and then as well. One of them is an auto crossbow because it hits so weak that if you accidentally shoot yourself on a deflect mob, you're not going to do much damage. But it's so fun if you run it with gravity for grouping enemies up together. Infinity, because otherwise you'll burn through your ammo so fast. Committed or rapid fire for even more speed or more damage, and fuse shot, because the shots are so weak by themselves that fuse shot is adding a lot, especially because the weapon's shooting so fast you're triggering a lot. But since you have gravity, you're pulling all of those enemies into that one spot, so all the explosions are hitting everyone at once. And so all of that damage from just the weapon hitting really fast itself and the fuse shot damage is going to help add with committed if you want to do that. And it's just crazy. You can just pelt the enemies with so many explosions from fuse shot that you can actually have a dead body loaded up with like 10 or more explosives, so you can, after that enemy's dead, it will still keep on exploding, and it dances. It flies everywhere. It's so fun. The other one, though, that I almost forgot to mention, because I had it in the last video that I uploaded, was Winner's Touch. The one that I like to run is, because it has pretty strong shots, and it does triple shots whenever you charge it, I like to run it with multi-shot for a chance of even more shots, because each of those 3 shots can multiply by 5. But also I run it with supercharge for more charge damage, overcharge for even more charge damage, and then refreshment, because the weapon gets a lot of kills pretty fast, so you can actually refill your potion for potion barrier really nice. But yeah, especially if you're using Gong of Weakening, you can one-shot bosses with that bow. Mini bosses especially too. It's just ridiculously overpowered. Just don't ever shoot a mob that has deflect with it, because you will kill yourself in one hit. But yeah, that's about it for the general guide. I will be talking about the weapons and their enchants, which you can see a little bit below in the next video.